About a year ago, I was living with my mate. I stayed in a ground floor flat that kind of sits in a cul-de-sac and is a bit of a pain to walk to, kind of detached from the community. The only times I felt completely secure are during sunlight, depending on the time of the year. The block of flats is kind of an L shape. Our entrance sits kind of inside that 90-degree angle. Inside the main building, there's a flat on either side and stairs in front. The immediate entrance hall is very dark. I feel like the lights choose when and when not to work. The flats are basic. A hallway, 2 small double bedrooms, a bathroom, a decent living room, and a small kitchen. The hallway is quite long and the living room is at the end of it. Both bedrooms face each other so we can talk from our doorways, if that makes sense. Telling you this because it'll help you picture the incident. It was about 11:30 at night and my flatmate was in her room, presumably asleep. She had a habit of leaving things unlocked and I have to make sure everything is locked up before I head off to sleep, but she'd gotten better and normally at least had the chain on the door if it wasn't locked. She always goes to bed early, so this wasn't weird. I was in the living room and decided to grab a pint of water before heading to bed myself. I went into the kitchen, which is attached to the living room, switching on the kitchen light and filling up a glass. The car park in front of the flat was very dark. I remember feeling kind of eerie. I'm not sure why, I just kind of felt like something was off. That kind of feeling you get when you switch the light off and run up the stairs. Anyway, I had a couple of sips and filled the glass a little bit more and headed to go out of the kitchen when the front doorbell went. I didn't even know we had a freaking doorbell. About 10 seconds passed before the letterbox was hit twice and my stomach sank. I felt trapped in the kitchen. Important to note 2 things. 1. If you step out of the kitchen, it puts you in perfect line with the hallway if the living room door is open, which it was. 2. Our front door had a bloody window so you could see the silhouettes of anyone outside or in. Us being girls, we had a cute gray curtain across it, but it was pretty see-through. I grabbed my phone and called my mate who was in her room. Right next to the front door, we both whispered, "Did you hear that?" Both thinking we'd misheard it, we had to whisper because the walls were like paper in that flat. You could always hear people coming and going. She came to her bedroom doorway but couldn't move forward because then she'd be in direct sight of the window. I edged my way out of the kitchen, keeping flat against the wall, eventually sinking to the floor, texting her now because we were both closer to the door and whoever would probably hear us. Another thing you should probably know is this person must have buzzed other flats to get in the building, but didn't buzz ours. So I reckon they saw me from the kitchen window. I'm a fairly ordinary looking 120-pound girl. Lying in a kind of army crawl, I saw the silhouette of a tall, broad, bald man. It could only have been a man. He clapped the letterbox again, but just stood there. Terrified, I mouthed to my mate, "Did you lock the door?" She said no. The chain wasn't on the door either. Now or never, I suppose. I crawled as low as I could to my bedroom, crawled to my desk, grabbed my keys, got to the door. It's only about a meter, and frantically shoved the keys in the lock and twisted, at the same time putting the chain on. This is a noisy affair. He obviously noticed I was there, hitting the letterbox again and trying the handle. As I desperately tried to twist the crap old school key in the lock, I got it. Terrified to stand up, my mate put her head out of her room to see if we were cool, and he wasn't there anymore. In a kind of half-stoned, half-asleep stupor, she reckoned on just going back to bed. Something nagged me though really badly. Remember how I said we could hear people coming and going really easily? It was eerily quiet and not once did either of us hear the building's main door open or close. This was someone in the building. We had one person across from us, 2 people above us, and 2 people above them. 2 of those flats are students. Our neighbor across the way was a 98-year-old woman. There was a couple and a sort of short, long-haired, chill guy. Nobody we knew matched the frame of the man in our flat window. I stayed up until I couldn't anymore, texting mates, jamming my room door shut, and keeping my hockey stick next to my bed. I realized about a month after this that the service button at the front of the main building was broken, and anybody could come in if they pressed it, and could be unheard coming in if they were very quiet, and knew they had to be careful with the door as it was old and heavy. I still think they saw me in the kitchen in the light, and thought to try their luck. This could have easily been a completely different story, so always lock your doors. Double lock, no matter how safe you reckon your area is. We have literally no idea to this day who that was or why, and we never heard anyone use the doorbell again. I used to work at an apartment complex. Larry was a resident who was a regular in the office. I'm using the term resident very loosely in this case, as Larry never actually had a lease at my complex. Larry effectively lived with an actual resident, a woman named Lydia, that had been living at the complex as long as I had worked there. When I had first started, it was a whole thing that no one in the office could easily communicate with her. She only spoke Portuguese, really, so she would get frustrated and become difficult to work with when we needed to post notices, put in work orders, and all that. Note, the maintenance man spoke Spanish, so he could communicate with her better than us, but he wasn't always available to act as a translator. Her small grandson also lived with her. He was on the spectrum, and we regularly witnessed her struggling to handle him. I'm not exactly sure how Lydia met Larry, but suddenly he was there one day and never left. Everything changed for the better when Larry arrived, though. Even though he never learned Portuguese and Lydia never learned English, they got along great and communicated fairly well through gestures. He would help her with putting in work orders and would somehow explain paperwork to her. Every day he was out in the pool with her grandson, working on social skills with him. The grandson grew so much in that period of time. If we were doing anything at that complex, like prepping for a storm or planning a complex event, he would always help us with moving large furniture and cleaning up. If he ever witnessed anyone being mean to us in the office, he would jump to our defense immediately, and he was always so polite and friendly. Everyone knew and loved him. The last time I saw Larry started out like any of his usual visits. He came into the office to drop off Lydia's rent and hung around briefly to chat and catch up. We just reopened after the holidays. He was very excited and said he had great news and asked for a hug. Immediately, that made me a bit uncomfortable. Asking for hugs was a thing a lot of creepy old men would do, but Larry had never behaved inappropriately towards me before. I chalked it up to him viewing our relationship as a friendly one and gave him a polite hug. Larry was a big guy, and he gave me a crushing hug that lingered about a second too long. He then told me the great news. He was getting reinstated at his job. I knew Larry had previously worked as a security officer or cop. He'd mentioned it a handful of times, but he'd had a heart attack on the job and gone onto a long-term disability. Occasionally, when you'd see him out swimming or walking in the complex, he would mention he was working to get approved to go back to work, but there was no mistaking Larry for a man in good health or good shape, and I never anticipated he'd achieve his goal. I congratulated him on getting his job back. All smiles. He then whispered, "Can I tell you a secret?" Okay. I work for the FBI. I do undercover investigations on bad men and put them away. He pulled out his wallet and flashed a badge very quickly. I follow them around and dig dirt on them. Then once I have enough, jump on it and arrest them. If I have to, I put them down. They even gave me my gun back. He pulled up his shirt, revealing a pistol concealed at his waist. As soon as he showed me his gun, a horrible feeling washed over me. Showing somebody your concealed gun is just not something you normally do. Something about his demeanor was completely different from all of our previous interactions. He was weirdly giddy, almost like he was high. He rambled on a bit more about his job, and I nodded along, not saying anything so that I wouldn't accidentally prolong the conversation. Finally, Larry got up to leave, but then jerked to a stop in the doorway and came back in. "Oh, I almost forgot my hug." I forced a laugh and jokingly said, "Oh, no, you didn't. Remember, you got your hug when you came in." No, I don't remember that, so give me one." If you've never been in a situation like this, it's hard to explain how stuck between a rock and a hard place you feel. On the one hand, you don't want to make any physical contact with this person, but there's also the fear of what will happen if you refuse them, and the wanting to defuse the situation. I gave Larry the hug, and he lingered longer this time. Then he said he'd see me tomorrow and left. After he was gone, I immediately documented the occurrence and notified my coworker and boss. The maintenance man said Larry had also shown him the badge and gun, and that he thought it was BS he was working for the FBI. Essentially, my boss's verdict was to wait and see if anything weird happened again, hoping it was just a one-time thing and that Larry would return to his usual self. Thankfully, it was a non-issue as he suddenly disappeared as quickly as he'd first shown up. The next time the maintenance man did work in Lydia's apartment, he asked about Larry, and she said she'd caught him stealing money out of her purse and had kicked him out. I will probably never know what happened to make Larry suddenly change like that. Maybe he was taking drugs or had a brain tumor, or maybe he was just a predator that had finally let his nice old man mask slip after years of successfully faking it. I don't believe I was in imminent danger that day or anything really, but Larry never overtly threatened me or was nasty and mean, but the situation probably would have gotten bad if Lydia hadn't kicked him out. Back in 2004, I was getting tired of paying rent and decided that I wanted to buy a small place for myself. Finances were tight and I couldn't afford to do it on my own, but my dad, being a real estate developer and investor, made a deal with me. He would help me with the down payment. I would pay the mortgage, and in 2 to 3 years when we sold it, we would split the profit. My dad had a great eye for house potential, and being a second-generation builder in the area, everybody knew him, and brokers would often show him off-market houses, ones that were going up for sale to the public soon, but were taking offers now. Our day started out simple enough. Go to a few open houses and see what was available. My dad's favorite broker was accompanying us that day, and they had a list of potentials for our viewing, starting with a house in a town called Terra Linda. We pulled up to the house and it was cute. Small and old like every house in the neighborhood, but it clearly had good bones and was a really, really good price. This was the kind of house my dad loved and would have been an easy flip, so we went inside. Immediately a smell, an almost sweet rotting smell filled our noses. When I say filled our noses, I actually sort of mean punched us in the face. My dad leant over to me in his always calm manner and said, "Don't worry, we can replace the carpets and paint the walls. That will fix the smell." "Okay, great, Dad, but there is no carpet." That is when we looked down and noticed that the floor of this house was bare concrete. The owners had the carpets removed. Our broker told us as she shrugged. "Okay, that's odd, but let's keep looking." We walked through the living room, a wonderful space, no doubt. But why are there huge holes cut into the sheetrock? Large 3-foot diameter holes, and not just one, but several. Shrugs all around. We toured the bathrooms, all 3 of them, and each toilet was filled with different varieties of fruit. One filled with oranges, one had apples, and the last I believe is grapefruits. What is this house? We left, and I expressed my confusion to my dad, who again calmly said, "Yeah, it's kind of a dump, but I can have a crew in here and have all of that fixed and looking great in 2 weeks." Seemed fair enough. We leave, actually excited about that property, and decide to go to the next one. Our broker walks us inside and exchanges pleasantries with the broker who is showing that specific house. They are talking and she mentions showing us the house on Hibiscus, and he says, "Oh, the dead lady house." Our broker nods, and that was the end. Wait, what? We look at the second house and I ask the broker about the dead woman's house. She says, "Oh, the owner of that house was an old woman who recently passed away, and she lived with her son there." And that was sort of it. My dad noticed my uneasiness with that answer. "Houses don't have feelings," he said, "and everybody has to die somewhere." My dad had bought plenty of houses where people had died and several where murders had taken place. It didn't affect him one bit. He looked at houses as wood and paint, not energy and feelings. I told him it didn't bother me, but inside it really did. We looked at a few more houses that day, and at the end, my dad and I decided to put an offer on the Terra Linda house. It really was a great deal, and as my dad said, everyone dies somewhere. I'll burn some sage or whatever, and that will be that. I'll admit that a little bit of greed took over as well. The house was well under market in a nice area. In 2 years, I could make enough to put down a down payment on a new place and not need my dad's help anymore. That was appealing. We placed an offer and went home. That night, I couldn't shake the uneasiness of the dead lady comment. I went to the webpage of my local newspaper and searched the archive. I entered the address and the first story that pops up, titled, "Woman dead in the house for 6 months with handicapped son." This isn't just a dead lady's house. Turns out this lady had a son who got into college in the mid-70s and, in turn, did a lot of drugs. So much that he quite literally fried himself. Not so far as becoming a vegetable, but unable to really care for himself, so he moved in with his mom, and 30 plus years later when she passed away, he didn't know what to do, so he just did nothing. Over the weeks and months since his mother's passing, and being unable to pay the bills, slowly the utilities and garbage stopped, and the smell coming from the house, not to mention nobody seeing the old lady who lived there, caused the concerned neighbor to request a wellness check from the police. Hundreds of pounds of trash and maggots in the walls was quoted by an interviewed officer. 1 week later, we were putting an offer in. I called my dad and read him the article. He was admittedly shocked and told me about his business partner Bob, who lives in a murder house, so don't worry about it. But I kept worrying. The next day I woke up and the worry had not subsided. I reread the article. I noticed there was no mention of the son. The article said he was taken to a hospital and examined, then let go. But let go where? This is the only home this guy knew. Was he going to find his way back? Instantly, I had visions of watching movies in the living room during a storm, and as the lightning strikes, I see him pulling out the window, yelling, "Mother" at me. I call the hospital and ask about the son. Of course, they can't give me any information, but I explained that I'm considering buying the house and I am worried that he might show back up. The woman's only reply was, "Well, all I can say is that it's a chance you are going to have to take it if you buy it." That was it. I called my dad back and had him remove the offer. No way. Done. A few years later, I drove by the house. It was being fully gutted. I have no idea if the son ever came home. I do know that the new owners made a killing on it when they sold it, but I didn't care. The fewer old lady ghosts and crazy roaming sons in my life, the better. When I finished university, I moved back home until I found a job. As soon as I could afford to, I set up a profile on the website Spare Room. I was contacted by James, who had a room to rent on the outskirts of the town I worked in. It sounded good, but he wanted to talk on the phone before inviting me to view it. We had a chat one evening, and it turned out that we had some things in common. We both enjoyed fitness, particularly swimming, and were movie buffs. By the end of the call, it had felt like chatting to an old friend, and I was looking forward to meeting him. James didn't specify his age, but I assumed he was in his 20s like me. When I went to view the property, he actually came out of the house next door to greet me. When he introduced himself as James, I was pretty shocked. He was at least 50, dressed quite conservatively, and looked like he was wearing a hairpiece. If he told me on the phone that he was in his early 20s, I wouldn't have questioned it. I went ahead with the viewing, but I'd already decided I didn't want to rent a room from him. I wanted to live with people who were a similar age to me. I was also put off by the house decor, which looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. When I viewed the bedroom, it looked like it was occupied by a young person. There were several pairs of trainers and a games console. James said that the previous tenant, Mark, was moving to London for work. Coincidentally, my name is Mark too. James invited me to sit in the living room after the house tour. I didn't want to be rude, so I did. He explained that he cared for his elderly mother who lived next door. Then he started complimenting my style, saying I looked cool. He proceeded to put his hand on my leg, which made me feel very uncomfortable. When he asked if I was interested in the room, I said I had some other properties to view, but would be in touch. I then made my excuses to leave. Everything about him screamed red flag. I just wanted to get out of that house. As soon as I was back in my car, I called my mom to tell her how freaked out I was and I absolutely would not be living there. James texted me a few days later to ask if I thought any more about moving in. I lied and said I'd found somewhere closer to town. I did eventually find something with some other young professionals, which turned out to be great. Some months later, our town was shocked by the news that a man's body had been found in the fields on the outskirts. He was later identified as Mark. I didn't think much of that until I saw a murder suspect was his landlord, James. The same James whose house I viewed. I saw him on the news and got instant chills. He was later convicted of Mark's murder. Background. I, 24 female, live with my roommate, 23 female, in an apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta. As you may know, Atlanta is super dangerous in parts and crime-ridden right now, so we have a Ring peephole camera, which is perfect for apartments, and a digital lock on our front door for safety. About 3 months ago, the sweet family from across the hall moved out, and we got a new neighbor. His name is David, and let's just say he's interesting. When we first saw him moving in, we were a bit taken aback by the sheer amount of stuff he was trying to fit in his one-bedroom apartment. All of it was anime merch and Star Wars memorabilia. Definitely gives me hoarder vibes, but not my business. When the moving trucks left and a few days had passed, my roommate and I knocked on his door to give him a welcome to the neighborhood gift basket with some baked goods, dog treats and poop bags for his dog, and seasonal candles. Apparently, this was not the correct thing to do. After that day, David got creepy. It started out fairly innocent enough. He would come to the door whenever he heard me or my roommate coming or going to have a quick chat, or he would come over regularly to ask for salt or sugar, or things like toilet paper. Sometimes, he would even ask if we could come over and watch his dog, but within the past 2 weeks, things have really escalated. 2 weekends ago, we were out pretty late partying at the bars near the Braves Stadium. We ended up getting home around 3 a.m. only to find David sitting at the top of the stairs waiting for us. He acted all upset and asked us where we had been, and requested that we tell him if we were planning to be out past midnight. I laughed in his face and he called me a mindless Stacy. Still not sure what that means. He also asked for access to our Ring camera so he could make sure we are safe. We laughed at him again and went to our apartment. But here's the scary part. We checked the Ring camera the next morning, and he sat outside his apartment staring at our door for the rest of the night. When we saw that, we contacted the complex to let them know that he was acting crazy. They told us to contact the police, so we did. The police told us to contact them if he made any threats, but since we lived in a shared place, they couldn't do much until he entered our apartment or threatened us. I assume the complex said something to him because he left us alone for the next 5 days or so. This week, he is out of control. He is constantly sitting outside of our apartment. My roommate has started leaving for work an hour earlier so that she doesn't cross paths with him. I cannot leave the apartment during the day because he is constantly waiting outside for me. He has asked me out, left love letters on our door, on our cars, and in our mailbox. I told him once that I wasn't interested, and he told me that he would freak out if I didn't go on a date with him. Of course, I don't have that in writing, so the police won't do shit. He also put up a Ring doorbell of his own so he can track all of our movements and will leave really creepy sexual notes when we're gone, so we find them when we come back. What do we do? Edit. Thank you for all the advice. For now, my brother is spending the night on my couch for the next few nights until we can have a sit-down meeting with my landlord. We have collected all the evidence and Ring footage so we can show how much this has progressed. I'm sure the landlord and the police think we're being dramatic little girls or whatever, so we're not going to take no for an answer. Either he leaves or we break our lease and we get our full security deposit back. We're also going to file for a temporary restraining order at the very minimum because some of the commenters said that would be faster than going to the police. Again, thank you all for the advice. I'll update you if any shit goes down. Another update. Thank you to everyone who replied in this thread and sent me PMs. I really appreciate all the kind words, advice, and support. 1. We met with our landlord last week. Unfortunately, they aren't willing to work with us as much as we expected. They will not remove him from his unit. Since we didn't want to spend a ton of money to move, we asked if we could move units within the complex. The landlord offered us a 1-bedroom unit on the terrace level, so my roommate and I would have to share a room in what is basically the basement of our building. Not ideal. We spoke to the police and they said that the notes and letters weren't enough to get someone on stalking or harassment, especially since he lives literally 3 feet away from us. Probably just thinks you're cute, they said. They did keep the Ring videos and said they would contact us sometime this week after they reviewed all of the footage. We both have moved in with my parents for the time being. Shout out to them for being incredible parents. It really sucks spending $2,000 monthly on a place that you can't live. We are actively looking for other apartments, but money is tight, since we would have to buy out the current lease and pay to start a new one. Also not ideal. So maybe not the update we're hoping for, but we are both safe right now, and that's what's most important. If anyone has suggestions about raising $5,000 in a month, please let me know. Over a year ago, I moved into this property. The front yard had visibly been dug up recently. It looks like crap. The front of the property had been hard to maintain. Grass not growing back properly, sunken ground, rocks, housing bricks halfway out of the soil, etc. The owner of the property I rent the house from claims to have no knowledge about who or why the front yard was dug up. The neighbors have mentioned seeing people before I moved in digging up the property with some sort of digger. Anyway, just the other day, I was sitting in the lounge watching YouTube videos, and for about an hour, I had that feeling I was being watched. Eventually, and reluctantly, I decided to go to the door to have a look. Of course, before I got there, I heard, "Hello," come from outside. I opened the door to find this man I've never seen before, blurting out information that only the owner, I, and a few people would know of. He knew the house was being sold in March, which was originally true, but it wasn't until a later date now. He assumed I was the owner and asked me if I could dig up the front yard. He was quite persistent on wanting to do so basically right now. All I managed to say was no, but I can ask the owner if you want. Meanwhile, I was thinking, what the heck? He stated he was previously there and dug up the yard. The rest of the conversation was awkward and basically went in my ear and out the other while I was trying to process what was going on, connecting the dots. Eventually, he walked away and down the street. I went to the lounge again and stood looking out the window, which looked out over the front of the property, directly to the road, and I saw him slowly drive past. He looked into the property once more before seeing me at the window and quickly threw up his hands in a waving motion. I don't know what to think of this encounter, to be honest, but it creeped me out, and I don't really want to find out what's in the front yard. I will be contacting both of my neighbors and the homeowner in relation to this incident as well as police. I'm not sure if I should have a little dig around in the property or not, but if I do, it will be this weekend. I didn't ask why he wanted to, which I know is completely stupid, but if there was something nefarious, I suppose I didn't want to cause any conflict at the time of this encounter, as it was only me at home at the time. Update. I dug up the property on the weekend. The soil is rather solid. All I found were glass bottles and rocks resembling obsidian throughout all of the soil, but I think it is only coal. The guy hasn't come around again, and I haven't seen anything suspicious yet. I did some research on the area, and the land was bought in the 1920s by the council for housing development. Prior to the 1920s, the area I live in was a dumping ground, for all matter of things, but why my front yard out of everyone around the area? I never saw him go and ask anywhere else. Hi, I'm 22 female from Hawaii and live on the more countryside of my islands where not even Google Maps can tell you exactly where I live. To put it simply, I live in the boonies and people who don't live by me don't come into my neighborhood unless they are lost. I'm only saying this for context for you. About 3 days ago, I was in my driveway on my way to catch the bus to work until a weird catering truck came towards my house and pulled into my driveway. A middle-aged guy came out wearing a tacky aloha shirt only tourists would be seen wearing, and dirty khaki shorts with run-down sandals. He looked dirty to say the least. Looked like he hadn't scrubbed in days. He asked me if I wanted to buy meat or seafood, and I said no thanks, and then asked if anyone was home. I lied and said my uncle, hoping he would go away. These kinds of trucks don't come anywhere on my side of the island, by the way. But he didn't. Then proceeded to compliment my looks, saying how I have nice hair, then going on about how beautiful island girls are, and how our curves are. Great is creepy stuff. It wasn't until my neighbor came outside that he drove away. Yet once I turned the corner, there he was. Then he slowly drove behind me. I felt sketched out to say the least and called my mom, who's a dispatcher, and told her what happened and how he looked. She told me that she would handle it. By that time, more people started coming out of their houses and he left. 2 hours later, I was at work and she told me that she got a couple other calls about the same guy with the exact description as me. And I was asked to go to the station to say if I recognized anyone, and I pointed at his picture. They confirmed that he is a well-known sex trafficker that they hadn't been able to track for weeks. Since then, I've locked my house as soon as my mom leaves for work. I haven't really slept since and have been throwing up or having panic attacks anytime I leave time for myself to think. I'm scared shitless and I don't know what to do. He knows where I work, my house, and my face, and it scares me to the point that I've even covered up my windows just in case somebody might try to look inside. The earlier post about a scary experience in a sex shop reminded me about my own experience a decade ago. I had just moved to New York and I hadn't really gotten my sea legs. I was a stereotypical Midwesterner who was just discovering the city and her sexuality, and I wanted to buy a toy or two to kill some time at home. This was a long time ago, but I remember it being dark outside when this story took place. Most of my creepy New York experiences take place after dark. Go figure. There are or were several great sex shops in the city pre-pandemic, but there are still many seedy places around, especially on the west side near Times Square or Penn Station. I'd always been curious about those stores, so I decided to go in on a whim. The shop was blue with white tile and filthy. There was dust on the ancient-looking dildos and faded porn DVDs, and the harsh industrial lighting made everything look even grosser and more depressing. I was neither impressed nor interested in anything there, but the 3 other men in the store seemed very interested in me. One guy, who I guessed was the manager, smiled at me and offered a discount as soon as the other worker left the room. I was young, broke, and stupid, so I thought this was because he didn't get women in often and wanted to impress me. He said there was something he wanted to show me in the back, and I followed him, thinking maybe he had newer, better products back there. Instead, he took me to a set of booths in the back, sat me down in a dark little booth with a blue door and a big TV screen, and turned on some porn. I was concerned, but his English wasn't very good, so I thought maybe he was trying to get me to pay to watch it. I figured I'd just tell him I wasn't interested, but then he stepped inside and closed the door. My alarm bells, which I had ignored up to that point. I have anxiety, so I'm always sort of alarmed, and started blaring at full volume. But I've had a habit of freezing. In stressful situations, I have an even worse habit of gaslighting myself into thinking everything's fine, so I just sat there trying to pretend that he had good intentions. Then he stood behind me and started feeling his way down my chest, and I couldn't pretend anymore. It felt like forever, but my flight senses finally kicked in, and I jumped up and leapt for the door. There was a terrifying moment when I pushed against it, thinking he'd lock me in, but I was so scared I'd actually turned the doorknob the wrong way. Finally, I slammed the door open and ran out of the store. I remember the other employee looking at me, confused as I passed him. The next day, I had a panic attack at work and almost got fired for taking an unnecessary break to go cry in the back. But that's another story for another time, so I'll leave it there. That was not, sadly, my only creepy sex store experience, but it was the worst. I've since learned to stick to nice little boutiques staffed by women and queer folks. Or, online. I love my job because it gives me so many instances where shit that only gets seen in movies is real. It's gotten to the point where I feel like I'm not safe in public without one of my husband's knives on my person after this. A common phrase I have heard all this month is, "Wow, you are a girl. You normally don't see women working in places like this." I wonder why. Let me clarify. I used to be one of those who wear nice work clothes to work. Shorts, tank tops, etc. However, working in a place like this, you have to be careful of who you are nice to because people take it the wrong way. It's my job to be friendly and help, but some people take it completely out of context. I had a guy come in the other night around 10 or 11 talking to himself saying, "Wow, it's one of those places. I've never been here. Since I work here, I try and say hello and see if he needs help, but he doesn't make eye contact with me at all. Proceeds to walk to the opposite side of the platform and say that exact same thing over again to my best friend, who was just keeping me company at work that day, and stare at her intensely while walking around. This guy was super tall and thin, and had a really bad few tan lines and was older. I got a weird vibe off of him when he came in the door, and it just got worse as he stayed in my store. He started walking down aisles talking to himself again and then making a huge circle in the store, avoiding eye contact with me. And when my friends and I started talking, he asked, "Can one of us come to the back area of the store where the lubricant is, which is under cameras but is a tight area regardless?" Because my creep radar was going off, I said, "I can help you up here so I can help the other group as well." He then started acting weird when another group of guys came into the store and talking to himself again. The guys could see my face go from super happy to unnerved because of the creepy dude walking around. My friend finally was able to get the other two guys to catch what was happening as the creepy dude dumped his change onto the counter to pay for a sample of lube and said, "I don't know what samples cost money. I might have to come back." Really creepily. He then got his change and started outside, where one of the guys who just came in followed behind to make sure he left, and he was talking to our outside camera in his roof. I was so glad he left after creeping me out for almost an hour. Flash forward to the following day, where I'm off for 4 days due to moving to a new place for work, and my boss calls. He says there was a tall older dude coming into the store looking for the girl that works here with a purse of some kind. He was instantly creeped out and told him to leave and not come back. He wasn't sure why he was looking for me, as I didn't tell him about the other night. So this happened in my very first relationship. I was almost 21 at the time when I met my ex. I had never been kissed before and never even been on a date. But somehow I got myself into a relationship with this guy that helped me with studying for one of my tests a few years ago. Looking back, the relationship itself was also full of major red flags. I don't want to go into detail because that's not the point of this story, but essentially he sometimes told me, "I wish I could assault you." Bear in mind that he first told me that a few days after I had my first time with him. He was always laughing and smiling creepily when women in movies were beaten up, murdered, or assaulted. When he saw such scenes, he always smiled creepily and told me, "This is a nice scene," etc. He told me he liked the look of beaten up women. I had the biggest pink colored glasses on and thought these things were jokes. One evening when I met him, he asked if we could meet a friend of his. I told him, of course, because I had never met any of his friends before. So we drove to his friend's flat. Everything was good. When I was there, they immediately got their shisha, some kind of water smoking device, no drugs included, and lots of alcohol ready. My ex knew that I never drank, but he begged me to do it. This one time for him, so I did. It was this kind of extremely sweet strawberry tasting alcohol in an extremely huge bottle. We sat and talked, smoked the shisha, and drank. Well, I drank. Recalling the night, my ex and his best friend had only had one drink, but once my glass was empty, they immediately put more liquor in it and told me to drink more. I don't know why, but I did. At that time, I didn't really think about them still being on their first drink while I'd already finished my third or fourth, maybe even fifth. I was getting drunk and also feeling extremely unwell. The friend of my ex told me to take off my hoodie, which I did. Thankfully, I had a top underneath, and once I did, he complimented me on my bomb-ass body, and said I should have come here dressed like that. He touched me by the neck and shoulders and tried to flirt with me while my ex was right there, still always giving me more and more liquor. I tried to get away from him, but he got closer again and tried to play with my hair. I was pretty uncomfortable, but already so drunk that I couldn't tell him to piss off. Then my ex and the friend got up and were talking about something in the corner of the room. My ex came back to me, and for about 30 minutes, the friend of my ex was nowhere to be seen. My ex began making out with my drunk self, and he tried to undress me, but I denied it, telling him that I was on my period, which was true. Once I told him that I could see that he was upset and almost slightly angry. He got up and got his friend, talking to him again, but this time I could see that the two of them were looking frustrated. I know that almost immediately after my ex and I went to my ex's flat, because we were told to go. After that, I can only remember the morning. My ex told me jokingly that I had passed out right before bed. I had the worst headache I'd ever experienced. I had my ex go and give me a bucket because my stomach turned and I puked so badly. I called my mom to pick me up. While waiting, my ex told me, sitting on the bed, that his friend would want to bang me so badly, and again, you know that I have the fantasy of assaulting you. Then my mom picked me up. When I was home, I shortly passed out in the bathroom, but after that I recovered. My ex mentioned the things about his friend wanting to bang me a few times after that, and asked me right after if he could give him my number. A few months after our breakup, his friend sent me a message on Facebook saying that he wanted to meet me. Looking back, I'm pretty sure that those two wanted to get me so drunk that I had no more control, and do you know what? The only thing that got into their way was my period. Such a creepy evening, and all the things that happened with my ex after that let me believe that. For example, recall a time there was a news in our country about a very drunk girl being assaulted by two men, and he always said, she was drunk, they did nothing wrong. Or like she wanted it. It's just sad that my rose-colored glasses didn't let me see that when we were still together. I should have run away immediately after he told me about his first fantasy. But on a happy note, I now have a boyfriend that treats me like I'm the most wonderful person on earth. This happened years ago. I think I was about 16. Back then, 16-year-olds could buy alcohol and cigarettes in the Netherlands, where I am from. It was a Friday night, and I was on my way to a friend's house, cycling as we do in the Netherlands. I took a detour as I wanted to buy a few beers, snacks, and cigarettes at the local supermarket. As I walk into the supermarket, a man, I think 50 years old, walks out. As we walk past each other, he looks at me and says, "Wow." I think nothing of it. Do the shopping, pay, and walk out. I don't know what the exact word is in English for those bins where you put old clothes in. The clothes are sent to Goodwill or poor countries, but the same guy from before was standing behind that bin. He was sitting on his bike looking at me. It was getting dark, streets were deserted, and I still had a 10-minute cycle ahead of me. I got this bad feeling about it, so I unlocked my bike and started cycling. This is when that bad feeling proved to be justified. As soon as I started cycling, that man started cycling as well. He catches up with me, and the conversation goes as follows. Man: "Hi, where are you going?" Me: "I'm going to hang out at a friend's house." Where does he live?" Trying to make him feel like I'm almost there. Just a minute from here." "Can I accompany you there?" "No thanks, I'm good." As I said that, he grabs my bicycle handles and pulls me closer. I almost fall over, regain my balance, and kick his bike. I start cycling as fast as I can, and he does as well, yelling at me. I arrive at my friend's house after what feels like forever. Unfortunately, my friend lives in a flat, so I have to ring the doorbell so he can buzz open the door. As I am ringing the doorbell frantically, the man just stands a few meters behind me waiting. I hear my friend asking, "Who's there?" over the intercom. I scream and cry, telling him to let me in, and he does. Luckily, my friends are all very big, scary-looking guys. They heard the panic in my voice, and as they see me as their younger sister, came down with chairs, ashtrays, and other makeshift weapons. Unfortunately, the guy had already left. I didn't want my friends to hurt him, just to scare him. I am 8 years older now, but I am still scared I'll meet another person like that man. So this happened less than 30 minutes ago, and I immediately thought of the subreddit and wanted to see what you guys thought. I am a single female living alone on the 3rd floor of a row home in Philadelphia. The house has been modified into 3 separate apartment units, and I am on the top floor. I ran through a property management group, and a few days ago, they let me know that they'd be sending someone out to repitch my window AC unit, as it had been leaking and water was getting in through the window downstairs. Old building, more their problem than mine. Cool, no problem. They send out a guy whom I assume they have contracted but is not necessarily a part of the property management group. He comes in, makes some light small talk with me about my 2 cats and gets to work. Nothing out of the ordinary. He finishes in about 15 minutes and lets me know he is done and leaves my unit. About 2 minutes later, I hear him knock on my door again. I usher for him to come in and he proceeds to ask me if I have an extra key for the main door downstairs. I tell him that my neighbors, whom I am close friends with, have my only extra copy and that I only have one in my possession. He then proceeds to ask about nearby Home Depots and the like, questioning as to the closest place he can get a key copied. I ask him straight up if he is implying that I give him my keys so that he can go make a copy, and he says yes, that the property management group asked him to ask me about it while he was there because they lost theirs. I politely told him that was not going to happen and suggested that he take it up with them if that's the case. I then called my property management company to confirm this information with them and report the incident just in case. They never answered the phone, so I ended up leaving a voicemail and a plan to follow up with an email as well. Small detail to add. I could have sworn I heard him messing with one of the doors downstairs after he left my unit the second time. The key to the main building is obviously different than the keys to get into each one of our individual units, so having a key to the main door is only the first step, but being that both I and the unit below me are single females living alone, I don't like this one bit. This is weird, right? Or am I bugging out? Update. My property management group answered the second time I called. My guess is that I was speaking to one of the leasing agents. She was pretty useless and sounded unbothered when I told her the story and basically said she would follow up with a contractor, but that she didn't really know anything about the service order because this was not a property she personally managed. I plan to give the other tenants a heads up. In his defense, he did not give me any weird vibes prior to, and even in his request, he sounded innocuous enough. However, and I don't know which door he was messing with, downstairs or main, he was messing with one. I thought about popping out to ask him what he was doing, but instead I opted to call my neighbor friend and loudly explain to her the situation that had just occurred, making sure to emphasize that I thought it was weird and that I was calling the property management company to fact check. The walls in this place are thin. If I could hear him, he could definitely still hear me. Shortly after my son was born, I moved into a new house with my girlfriend. I felt really lucky as we found an actual house for rent that was cheaper than any apartment we came across, and it was in the school district that we wanted. The house was quite isolated from the neighbors. The front of the house was abnormally far from the street, and the backyard was surrounded by a dense tree line. At nighttime, it looked as if we were surrounded by nothing but darkness. It wasn't really long when I started feeling unnerved, like somebody was watching me. This feeling almost always came from one window in particular, the window above the sink where we also had the air conditioning unit. It was the only window in the house where it would fit and reach an outlet. I brushed it off and did my best to ignore these feelings because I didn't want to freak out my girlfriend. I knew if I put the idea in her head, she'd never stop stressing, as she was diagnosed with anxiety. One night, I was on the couch with my girlfriend laughing and talking when I got that feeling again. I noticed my girlfriend got silent suddenly and was staring at the very window that made me feel uneasy. So I asked her how she was feeling. She told me that sometimes she feels like someone is watching her from that window but didn't want to mention it because she was afraid that I would think she was being crazy. Things got worse from here. I started hearing the dividers on the AC unit open when we were in bed at night. We'd hear pebbles and coins being thrown into our kitchen. I'd hear twigs snap outside at night, and I'd hurry and grab a flashlight and shine it outside of the window. I was actually hoping I'd see someone at this point, because the unknown element was driving me crazy. Every night, I was terrified I'd come home from work to my family being murdered. I'm still hanging on to the idea that I'm just imagining this stuff, but it was all confirmed one morning when I went out to the back to smoke a cigarette, and all of a sudden I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Goosebumps over my whole entire body before I could even realize what I was looking at. On the screen to my bedroom window, someone had written, "Coming," but backwards as if they wanted us to read it from the inside. What made this even scarier was the window was open and I slept right next to it. Basically, you could reach in and stab me in the back without even having to stand on anything. I started to keep all of the windows shut and locked. I even stacked empty soda cans in front of them, so if somebody did manage to open a window, they'd make a ton of noise coming in. One night, I got home from work at my usual time, about 1 a.m. or so. We were going out of state for a couple of weeks the next morning, so I really wanted to just get home and go to sleep. I shower and we get all the lights off and we make our way to the bed. Almost immediately, we hear the divider on the AC open up and the pebble comes bouncing through the kitchen. I snapped. I got up and screamed, "I'm sick of this BS. I'm gonna kill you." I get dressed, hand my cell phone to my girlfriend, and tell her to lock the door behind me, but to call 911 if I yell, to not open the door unless she's certain that it's me. I get outside and I'm just listening for movement. It probably took me a few minutes to get dressed and get outside. Finally, about 20 seconds later, I hear a car door slam on the street directly behind us through the tree line. I hear its tire squeal as it peels out, and I can hear it driving really fast through our neighborhood. I'm hyper aware at this point, and I can tell the streets it's taking, as I've been in this neighborhood my whole life. I hear it turn onto the main street and realize it's got to pass my street next. But it don't pass my street. It turns down. It drives really fast past my house, and all I could think to do is point at it, looking as aggressive as possible. I went to sleep. We all went on vacation for a couple of weeks the next morning, and neither one of us ever got that feeling again. We never even heard a single noise out of the ordinary again. But the next time I moved, I made sure to buy a house with a window high off the ground. This just happened a few hours ago. My house is on the very edge of town, right before a large wooded area. We do have neighbors. There are 6 apartments in total and some across the street, but it was around 11 p.m. and at that time, most of them are usually asleep or sitting in the front of their TV, or both. I went out to take my dog on a walk and noticed a bike leaning against the wall in the driveway. It seemed odd since there's a bike rack behind the house, but I didn't really think much of it and went on. When I came back, the bike was still there. Now, there are walls on both sides of the driveway, about 5 feet tall at the highest point right behind the gate. So, I looked up the wall to my left, right into the cold dead stare of a woman crouching on the wall. Scared as heck, I just kind of stared back for a second. I had never seen this woman before. She didn't move whatsoever. My dog seemed also rather confused and scared. I kept walking to the door but never took my eyes off her. Once we were past her, she jumped off the wall and started following us. At that point, my dog, a pretty big Doberman mix, began barking and growling, and that luckily stopped her from coming any closer. I got in the house, locked the door behind me, and am once again glad that I had this dog with me. I don't know who she was or what she was up to, but the scariest part is that she probably already stood there when I went out. So, creepy lady in my driveway, I hope you have left and please don't ever come back. A lot of people suggested calling a non-emergency number. I've called there a few times before, because of vandalism and trespassing on some abandoned buildings next to our house. And frankly, they don't give a crap. I doubt they would have even done anything. Plus, because it was very dark, the description I could have given of the woman would be very vague. There's a happy ending to this story. I'm 6'8" and a bodybuilder. I have a buzz cut and at least 30 tattoos all over my body. Plot twist. I'm a lesbian. This wasn't really my problem, but I stuck my nose in because I'm not a heartless asshole. People who know me always say the first thing they thought about me when they met me was, "Dang, she's scary." But my nickname is Gigi, for short, gentle giant. That's my background for this. This was happening to a girl when I was at the store. I was at Target and was there to grab some mac and cheese and leave. I walked down the aisle and saw a girl backed against the shelf by a man. He was wearing a huge gray coat, which was weird as heck because it was like 90 degrees out that day. I was wearing a tank top and some shorts, while the girl was wearing a dress, so I don't know what the guy's problem was. She shot me a look of surprise and alertness, then looked back at the guy quickly. I have bad hearing and almost deaf in one ear, so I couldn't hear what the man was talking about. I started walking forward and caught the end of what he was saying. The guy, we're going to call him Max. The cute girl is going to be Jessie. The red one is yours, right? I'll meet you there and we can go back to my place. That sounds fun, doll, Max asked. His voice made me wish I were actually deaf. "Hey, sorry I took so long. I had to help some lady out. Who's your new friend here?" I asked when I got to them. Jesse let out a sigh of relief when he turned my way. He looked up at me in confusion, then looked back to her. "Who's this doll?" he asked, looking back to her. "I'm her girlfriend." "What do you want?" I asked cautiously. "Doll and I are going back to my place," he said, and smiled creepily at her. "No, we're heading back home right now. Come on, let's go. We're not going back to this Target. It has a Walmart problem," I said, and watched as she nodded frantically while speed walking over to me. "Come on, doll. Are you really going to go with this chick? I'll show you the right side. But I can change your mind even." He yelled loudly and took off after us. We had started walking in the middle of this speech. I had already told her I was going to pick her up because I was sure he would go after her. She is only 5'2" if you want to know. As soon as she tapped me, I picked her up and set her on my shoulders. I felt the guy ram into me a second later. He was probably only 5'6" and didn't have any muscle on him from what I could see. He kind of bounced off and started yelling nonsense while following us. We made it to a worker who called the police and they took him away in handcuffs. The whole time this is happening, he's trying to punch me or grab her and is failing horribly. Funny thing is, I stayed with her the rest of the trip and walked her to her car. She gave me her number and now we're going to be married in a week. This happened 2 years ago and now she's going to be my wife. I came home from work today to receive some very unsettling news from one of my roommates. It started when I went to let the dogs out into the backyard. Our back door is in the kitchen, so on my way to let them out, I passed by the oven and noticed that it was on. It surprised me a bit because my roommate, Mandy, was the only other person home and she had been spending most of her time back in her room due to feeling sick. Even so, I figured that I'd better ask her first before turning it off, on the off chance that she was actually using it. I went to the end of the hallway where her room was, knocked on her door, and asked, "Hey, is the oven supposed to be on? Like, are you using it right now?" Confusion and concern were immediately apparent in her voice as she replied, "What? No, I haven't even been out in the kitchen today." I shared her confusion and concern upon hearing this, but then pondered the possibility that Carl, her brother and our other roommate, had been the one to leave it on by mistake. I asked her if this could be the case, and she told me that Carl was still at work and had been since early that morning. This was when she and I began to piece together that something very strange had to have happened. I told her that I had just gotten home a few minutes prior. It was a little after 3 p.m. at that point, and I had left the house at about 7:30 that morning. She then informed me with horrific realization that around 11 a.m. she had heard noises coming from the living room, including a woman's voice, a chair moving, and the front door opening. She didn't realize at the time that I was at work, so she just assumed it was me and didn't think much of it. She then mentioned that in hindsight, though, the dogs were barking an unusual amount during this time. I asked her how long the noises coming from the living room went on, and she said that it was hard to tell because she was trying to sleep at the time, but that if she had to guess, maybe 20 minutes. Mandy, Carl, and I are the only current residents of this home, and as mentioned before, Carl and I were both at work during that time frame, so Mandy was the only person who reasonably should have been in the house. I thanked her for informing me of this and then went back to the front half of the house and did a quick comb of the area to check for anything else that looked out of place or missing. I didn't discover anything else out of the ordinary, and as of the time of this posting, nothing else has come of it. Update. Pretty small but still pretty weird. I went to the hall closet to get more toilet paper for my bathroom and I noticed an empty wrapper / packaging for a new pillow in there. I didn't buy a new pillow recently. I asked both of my roommates if they did and Mandy said she bought a new pillow about a month ago, but that she threw the packaging away. This is my first time noticing the packaging in that hall closet, and I last went into the hall closet just a couple weeks ago, if I remember correctly. I will continue to post updates if I notice anything else weird, and if anything major happens in this situation, I'll make a whole new post to update you all. Thank you so much for everyone for all the concern, support, and advice that you've been offering. Huge update. New information and events have emerged that are almost certainly connected to this incident. Late last night, I woke up from a nap to find that Mandy and Carl were seemingly angry about something. They were initially in the living room, but then they stormed back into Mandy's room immediately after I walked in, and I heard pounding and cursing. I inferred from this that they were angry at me and started wondering about the possible reason. In any case, a few minutes later, Carl walked out to the living room where I was and told me, "Don't worry, we are not mad at you." He then returned to Mandy's room and said, "I have something very important to tell you," before entering it. Fast forward another short while later, and the two of them walk back into the living room, looking like they have something to talk to me about. They inform me that a source close to them was recently confirmed that there has indeed been somebody who's been standing outside the house and watching our home at odd hours. They have yet to directly catch them in the act, but they can tell it's happening based on hearing noises and reactions from our dogs. There have been a few more strange instances in the past few days leading up to this. First, when I woke up from an after-work nap one night, I went into the living room to find that all of the lights had been unplugged and the bulbs loosened. I also found that the lock on the door leading out to the garage had been jammed. Then a little while later, while I was in the kitchen making dinner, I found that the microwave and the toaster oven were both also unplugged. The lights being unplugged thankfully turned out to have an innocent explanation, that Carl was just trying to save on the electric bill. But when I asked him about the microwave and toaster oven, he had no idea. He said he didn't do that and he doesn't think Mandy did either. He tried to say that they must have come unplugged by accident, but frankly I very much doubt that. The part of the wall where they're unplugged in is a little corner that gets virtually no hand traffic, so to speak. On top of that, the microwave plug is thick and sturdy, certainly not the type to accidentally come unplugged just from somebody bumping into it with their hand. So with all of this considered, the idea that they could have come unplugged by accident simply wasn't plausible. As for the lock on the door to the garage being jammed, that had the creepiest explanation of all. I'd forgotten to ask about it at the time that I was asking about the stuff being unplugged, but they ended up bringing it up last night when they were filling me in on everything else. They told me that they had found the door out in the garage that leads to the backyard unlocked. None of us used that door in months, so somebody had undoubtedly picked the lock on that door and gotten into the garage at the very least. Their discovery of this led to them taking the extra precaution of double locking the door that leads to the garage from indoors. Mandy also brought to me an extra chilling detail about the previous incident that she had forgotten to mention until then. You may recall that one of the sounds she heard coming from the living room was a woman's voice. Well, she informed me that the voice she heard sounded a lot like mine, and on top of that it sounded muffled as though it were coming from a recording. This means that there is a very real possibility, even likelihood, that whoever was behind this incident had somehow obtained a recording of my voice and was purposely using it to make it seem as though I was the one in the living room at the time. They even seemed to have an idea about who it was but remained vague about that, presumably not wanting to jump to any conclusions. I was able to gather that they definitely believe it to be a man though. However, upon further discussion, we came to the conclusion that there are likely multiple people involved. A theory that we all had to varying degrees was that Carl's ex Ashley is behind this in some way. She and Carl had a very nasty breakup last summer, and she's displayed unhinged behavior towards him and Mandy ever since, including breaking in on 2 separate occasions. After the second time, Carl finally got a protective order against her, but that hasn't stopped her from seemingly trying to get around it. She hasn't directly shown up during the times that we're home, but she has been texting both of them from unknown numbers, on and off a few times, and even managed to hack their Facebook accounts just a couple of months ago. On top of all of that, Carl has confirmed that Ashley does indeed know how to pick locks. I also noticed and pointed out that all the major incidents seem to be occurring during times that I'm not home, and brought up the suggestion that this could be deliberate. One of my friends who I had described the situation to had said that if this person is indeed deliberately carrying out their acts when I specifically am not home, it likely indicates that their vendetta is only against Mandy and Carl and that they do not want me involved in the crossfires. That lends credence to the theory of Ashley being involved. For all of her anger and erratic behavior towards Mandy and Carl, she had never had a single negative interaction with me personally. She showed fondness for me and we parted ways without any hard feelings after Carl ended things. When I explained all of this to Mandy and Carl, they found that made a lot of sense. As for the reason we believe there are multiple people involved, as previously mentioned, the person who's been the main one watching our house seems to be a man. But the one actually picking the locks and entering is most likely Ashley herself, or maybe one of her female friends, since they would have light enough tread to come and more effectively slip in and out secretly. A lot of this is still speculation, but given all the circumstantial evidence, I have a feeling that we are not too far off with our intuition of what's happening. When I was about 7, I had my own room on the other end of the house from my parents. I was a very anxious child with an active imagination. We lived in an old family farmhouse in a couple miles outside the town my father grew up in. His family lived near us, all within a couple of miles. My aunt had lived in the farmhouse before we did, before I was born, but moved out after she and her husband divorced. One night, I woke up and saw a man standing in the corner of my room. I ran to my mom and dad's room screaming. My parents rushed in and, saying nothing, assumed I had a bad dream. I got to sleep with him the rest of the night. The next night, I woke up and saw the man standing outside my window. Again, I ran to my parents, and again they saw nothing. This occurred for about 2 weeks, every single night. Sometimes the man would be in my room, sometimes he'd be right outside. My parents never believed that he was real. Until one night when I woke up to the man standing above me. He was blocking my path to get out of my room, to even get off my bed. I was terrified, and we stared at each other for a long time in silence before he walked out of my room, straight out of my bedroom door. I finally gained enough courage to race out of my room and wake my parents. By this point, they were tired of the sleepless nights caused by the overactive imagination of their child. I think my dad walked to my room just to comfort me, saying, "No one is in your room, honey. It was a dream." Except it wasn't. The large muddy boot prints that stained the wooden floor were proof of the man. Eventually, my dad found out my aunt's ex-husband had been released from a psychiatric hospital where he was being treated, and he returned home. He still had a key to the laundry door. My aunt failed to tell us that she didn't change the locks. My aunt's ex-husband suffered PTSD from being a prisoner of war while in Vietnam. He self-medicated and fried his brain. Though we never knew why for sure he did it, he was found deceased soon after in a riverbed. I don't think he meant me any harm. When I was 18, I was working 2 jobs, both at diners. One was in a downtown area in a Colorado town, and the other was right next to the highway. This night, I was working at the one next to the highway. Both diners were in fairly quiet towns that after 9 p.m. were practically empty as people were home. It was summertime, so I was walking to the bus stop at about 10 p.m., and the bus stop was only about 2 blocks away from the diner. I get to the bus stop, a park and ride, and it is lit, but everything around it is dark. I had walked to 5 minutes in darkness, more scared of bears than the thought of people when I really should have been more scared of people. I sit down on the bench and know my bus will be there in about 15 to 20 minutes, so I'm reading but keeping an eye on my surroundings. 2 men walk up to the stop and sit 2 benches down from me. They start talking loudly about how pretty I am and how I shouldn't be alone. They're homeless, and typically in this town people are calm and almost everybody knows everyone, so I just ignored it, knowing the bus would be there soon. But then they start talking about how I owe them something for being so pretty, and one says, "If you don't look at us, I'll drag you to the bushes." They started to move to the bench next to me, so I called my parents' house and asked for my dad. My brother tells me to shut up and just ride the bus because I can't explain what's happening in front of the men, as I know that would lead them to them immediately attacking me. He hung up and I called my dad, and at this point decided to walk away from the bus stop, booked it across the road, and ran away from that stop. The men tried to follow, but with me being on the phone and talking to someone, they stopped. I told my dad what was happening, and he called the police and met me at a store down the road. I was young and dumb and didn't make a report. My dad did because I didn't get a good look at the men and felt guilty for some reason. I should have made a report because those men ended up raping 2 other women at the bus stop over the next few nights. My incident was included in their sentencing, and they were sentenced to prison time. I don't remember for how long, but they did get justice. My dad picked me up from work every day after that, despite me stupidly saying I was still going to ride the bus. I will always be thankful that I had the sense to call somebody and not just try to run. Always be on the phone or pretend to be if you feel unsafe, because most of the time it will help you get out of there safely. Edit: my brother was not a bad guy in this situation, and he would have reacted differently if he had known. Older brothers can be asses, but he actually is an amazing guy and loves me a lot. Just wanted to throw that out there so nobody thinks ill of him. I, female 31, stays away from home on a business trip. About an hour ago, around 8:30 p.m. here, I had just gone back to my room for a work dinner. I heard shuffling in the hallway and peeked out at the people. I saw a figure seemingly outside the room to the left of mine, looking outward. They were knocking lightly and said twice quickly, "Hello, hello." Then it sounded like the door opened and closed. I was like, okay. They must have forgotten what room they were in or something, and somebody let them in. I walk back to the main part of my room and I hear shuffling again. I look out again and see a figure. I can't really make out what the person looks like, but I see them on the other side of the room this time and again hear light knocking and said, "Hello? Hello?" Now I'm starting to get a weird spidery sense of like, what the heck is going on? I see the figure leave and think, okay, that was weird. Then I again start hearing shuffling. I start walking toward the hotel room door and hear a light knock on what sounds to be my door. Again, I hear, "Hello?" And immediately after, somebody attempts to open my door. Thankfully, I had the cross latch pulled over. Not the deadbolt, though. My heart stopped as I stood there and watched the door hit the latch and fall back shut. I called the front desk and informed them that somebody had just tried entering my room and I'm not staying with anyone. The front desk attendant just replied, "I don't have any housekeeping up there." To which I replied, "Okay, well, that's concerning. Can you please send somebody up to check around?" The attendant replied, "Well, there's no manager on duty." To which I asked if I should call the police instead because I was worried, as I started to cry a bit. She replied that I should do what I thought I needed to. I hung up and cried for a bit, not sure what to do. I didn't want to ask for another room because I'm too scared to leave now. 10 minutes later, the hotel phone starts ringing. I was honestly feeling really scared to answer, but I did. It was the front desk again, and she said the police were going to be coming to my room and she didn't want me to panic when I heard somebody knock on my door. I said okay and hung up. I sat there and thought, how do I know this is legit? Whoever tried to access my room had a key. Otherwise, how else would the door have actually opened? A few minutes later, as expected, I hear a knock. I looked out the peephole and saw 2 male officers. I didn't ask to see ID, which in hindsight probably would have been the smart thing to do, but I was so shaken up and not really thinking. I opened the door and they asked what was going on. I told them all that I explained above. They said it was good that I had the cross latch pulled over because the door would have opened if not. I responded, "It's a hotel, what do you mean? What's the point of the access card then?" And wiggled the handle. We were in the hallway talking with my door open. Then they took a pause and they were like, "Oh, it automatically locks." Again, I'm like, yeah, it's a hotel. So when they had me shut the door and open it with the key to test it, sure enough, it didn't open without the access card. Then they said it was probably housekeeping. I responded that the front desk attendant told me there was no housekeeping up when I called. Plus, it was 8:30 p.m. Why would housekeeping be coming by at that time unless I had requested someone? Plus, I noticed housekeeping had already been by during the day because my trash was emptied and dirty towel was gone. They ultimately told me that they thought it was housekeeping and not to worry, but if anything else happened or if I felt unsafe, to call them. They also said if I wanted to change rooms, they were sure the hotel would accommodate this. I said okay while crying and they left. Now I'm just sitting in my room crying, lying under the covers in my clothes. I'm sure I won't sleep tonight. I'm also too afraid to change rooms because I don't want to leave this room. I have the cross latch pulled over and the deadbolt locked. I think I'm safe. Am I being paranoid? Or was it probably housekeeping? Should I be doing something different? Edit. I'm home safe and promptly came down with a nasty bug, slowly crawling out of it. And thanks for all the comments. I really do appreciate this community for making me feel like I did the right thing. And although some of the comments made me more paranoid, example like people looking through the peephole from the hallway, overall it made me feel not so alone and distracted me a bit while I was up all night. I think so often people are afraid that their reaction to a situation is over the top and or embarrassing. I'm glad I followed my gut and reacted the way I did to do what I could do to stay safe. I was able to speak with my manager the next day when she came in at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, the response from her was disappointing, just like the night shift front desk clerk and the morning shift front desk clerks when I clocked out. Needless to say, I will never stay in this hotel again and I will be avoiding this large chain as a whole. In late June, my 19 female boyfriend, 19 male, and I were headed back from a Walmart in his town. We live an hour apart and I was visiting. I was driving on somewhat of a back road and there was a four-way stop. Across from me was what looked like a work truck, parked behind another car and flashing its brights. Nobody else was at the intersection, so I decided to go ahead and keep driving. As soon as I pulled out, a car came speeding, somewhere around 90 miles per hour in a 30 miles per hour zone. from around the corner and almost T-bones my car on the passenger side. Luckily, I sped up and got out of the way, and the car swerved and stopped on the side of the road and flashed its hazards. We were freaked out. Maybe it wasn't the right thing to do, but I kept driving because nobody was hurt. Probably just shaken up and scared. So we kept driving, and my boyfriend was guiding me through the roads, and we were talking about how bizarre it was that we didn't even see or hear that other car. Then I noticed there's a car behind us. It's probably 1,000 feet behind, so I don't think anything of it. And it keeps getting closer and closer. Finally, this car is on my ass. Once he's there, he turns on an extremely bright light, and it nearly blinds me. We realize it's the work truck that was across the intersection. I ducked down out of the way of my rear view so I could see the road and kept driving, even speeding up a little bit. My boyfriend tells me maybe we should pull over. Maybe somebody was hurt and they were flagging us down. But we were on a back road with absolutely no light posts and nowhere to pull in that was well lit. Absolutely not. Eventually, my boyfriend had to hold the wheel for me because I couldn't see at all. My vision was blurry and spotty. I started to pull into a neighborhood, but the truck started passing me and we almost got into another almost accident. The neighborhood was dark, of course. The truck slows down to a stop and backs up so that it's directly behind us, still on the main road while we are parked in this neighborhood. The driver starts shining a flashlight at my car, mostly at me. Then it goes over to my boyfriend. After it gets to him, the light shuts off and the truck slowly pulls off and leaves. My boyfriend and I were shaken up, and once I regained my vision, I drove us back to his apartment, wary of the cars around. We told his dad about it, and he said it's a good thing we didn't get out of the car. People get murdered all the time from this kind of stuff. We thought it was just weird, but thinking back on it, that driver probably saw me and targeted me. And once they realized there were 2 people in the car, they didn't want to deal with that and left. They wanted me, it seems like. What do you guys think? For clarity, this took place back in 2012 or 2013 when I was a sophomore in high school in a small town in the US. Now, I'm not the most attractive girl out there, but I guess you could say that I was an early bloomer, so male attention is something I've been aware of since I was about 10. Yeah, I know, it's bad. To the story, I knew this guy from school, as he was kind of in the same friend group as my boyfriend at the time. He was one of those guys that just weirded people out, but I never paid him much attention because he left me alone and never had actually done anything bad to me personally until then. He sat behind me in our geometry class and never really interacted until one day some kind of switch went off in his brain that we were close friends and he could do or say whatever he wanted to. It started out with him touching my hair. I have long, thick blonde hair that goes almost all the way down to my back, and telling me that it smelled nice. Over the week, this escalated to him touching my thighs and back and trying to tickle me by poking at my sides to get me to jump. I could handle all of that. I'm used to it. I thought that it was just boys being boys, so I said nothing and just told him he was annoying and to not touch me. I guess I didn't seem sincere enough because the next day he came in, sat down, and immediately pulled my hair, causing me to yell out. I wouldn't say I'm confrontational, but I'm not the type of person to allow someone to just pull my hair and get away with it either. I got up and moved a few seats, telling him enough was enough and he needed to leave me alone. I was annoyed and confused at the fact that nobody was doing or saying anything to this guy. Everybody saw him, but it doesn't stop there. He gets up and moves to the seat behind me again. This is the point where I realize he's not being another annoying teenage dude. He leans in, sniffs my hair, starts petting it, and whispers, "What would you do if I unhooked your bra right here in class?" While saying this, his hand stops where my bra is lashed behind my back and pulls on it hard. I freak out. I'm furious and cuss him out, but luckily the bell rings and I sprint out of the room to go to lunch. I meet up with my friend who is also my ex-boyfriend's friend, and all that anger disappears and is replaced with emotions I couldn't describe. I cried and told him what happened. Thankfully, he took me seriously and immediately grabbed my best friend out of the lunch line and explained the situation to her, telling her to take me to the security office. I was too much of a mess to be talked to at this point. Thankfully, the school took it very seriously and assured me that nothing was my fault and handled the situation appropriately. The guy was suspended for a week or so, and my mom was called in and asked if I wanted to press charges. I didn't want to. I just wanted him away from me, so they changed his schedule to not overlap with mine when he got back. I know this isn't the most exciting or crazy story, but I'm 22 now, and I still can't get it out of my head. Like, why me, and why did none of the other students stop him? Why hadn't the teacher seen anything or done anything about it? I guess I'll never have those questions answered. About a year ago, I was working as a wage slave cashier at my local Arby's. At the time of my encounter, I had been working there for just about 3 weeks, so I was used to the stuff that normally goes down in the lobby of a fast food place past 8 p.m. Lots of stoners. However, things would usually stay pretty normal before then, which is why the man that I'm going to talk about struck me as odd. At around 4, I see an old white Ford with a 2x4 in the place of a bumper roll up and park an odd distance from the door in the empty parking lot. No one exits the vehicle. About 15 minutes later, a mom and her presumably 6-year-old little boy enter and start placing their order. Over the mother's shoulder, I see a man get out of the white car. I kind of lose focus on the order at hand as I see this man stumble towards the building. He had half his face covered in a long beard and the other half was clean shaven. He had a greasy mullet and cut off jean shorts. He was clearly a meth head. As I finish the order I'm taking, I see him sit down in a booth just out of sight of the register, but where I know he can see both exits and the restrooms. Since major alarm bells are already going off, I tell the drive-thru guy about our little creep situation during a lull in the business. Just as I finish relaying all the information to him, I see the little boy run into the bathroom. I run to my coworker and say, if he gets up, I'm going to clean the bathroom to keep an eye on him. And to no surprise, the meth head gets up and staggers, talking incomprehensibly to himself toward the bathroom. I quickly grab the spray bottle and exit the kitchen and open the bathroom door just after the man. He sees the locked stall the boy is clearly in and turns around to find me eyeing him in the mirror that I'm cleaning. So he quickly pretends to wash his hands and goes back out to his car without ordering. He doesn't leave though. I alert a manager, a rather large but really nice guy, about the situation, and he agrees to call in another employee so that we can put somebody out in the lobby at all times to keep an eye on him. Several times throughout the night, from 4 to about 6:30, he followed families in, sometimes sitting in his spot, sometimes ordering something and throwing it away before sitting down. However, the final straw was when he followed another boy into the bathroom. Again, I cleaned the mirror. Again, he washed his hands before bolting back to his car. This time, my manager was actually starting to freak out about our friend, but one of the drive-thru regulars, an off-duty cop, came through. The manager quickly asked him to go talk to the guy and see what was up, and the officer agreed to check him out. I see the cop's SUV come around in front of the building and park a little away from the Ford. As the officer steps out, I see the Ford's lights turn on and pull away. I think being caught going into the bathroom after a little boy twice tipped this guy off that he wasn't slick, so he ran at the slightest notion of a confrontation. I'm happy that I was working the register that day, because I was always very observant. I got used to the druggies, but that guy was the only customer I ever had in my 2 months there that really creeped me out. So today has been a particularly slow day at work, and I've been killing time reading these scary stories. Maybe enough time has passed and I can share mine. I had this friend who was really into the occult. Unfortunately, I was the one who got him turned into it. We had a mutual appreciation of the paranormal and all things weird, so I thought the subject would interest him. He started going deep into the subject to the point where he wouldn't talk about anything else. He would actually interrupt the conversation and force the subject back to occult matters. Kind of rude, but sometimes people go through phases where their interest is all they want to talk about. It was mostly a forgivable offense. I think I should mention that this particular friend didn't have a very large friend circle. His depression and introverted nature kept him inside a lot. He didn't have the best luck in relationships with women either. His world was kind of small, and I did enjoy hanging out with him, so I did my best to be a good friend. I didn't want to just brush him off because he was acting a little bit weirder than normal. Honestly, for the longest time, he was a totally normal guy. We would chat and play games together on the PlayStation. Sometimes we'd even go see movies, with my boyfriend accompanying us, of course. We all hung out at the park, went swimming, and overall we had a good time hanging out. Then things started to go downhill when he started to smoke DMT. Personally, I think psychedelics can be amazing tools that can offer insight into your life, but they should be treated with respect for sure. My friend got to the point where he was making it himself. Apparently, it's a pretty easy thing to do after a meager amount of research, and he was smoking it daily multiple times a day. For those of you who aren't familiar with that substance, when you smoke it, you get transported to a different world, an entirely new plane of existence. Your body and yourself doesn't exist anymore. You're just exploring this alternate reality dreamscape. My personal experience with it led me to seeing a dragon once in this kaleidoscope of a thing. People see all kinds of different things there. Imagine what it does to a person when they're smoking it 30 plus times a day. He started telling me things like he was reincarnated Osiris. He said he was seeing Egyptian hieroglyphs all over the place in waking life. Apparently, he had 4-hour-long conversations with entities in his bedroom even when he wasn't smoking DMT. Of course, I was very scared to hear all of this, and I told him he needed to take a serious break. No drugs at all for a few months so he can find solid footing in reality again. At this point, I was still hanging out with him because he obviously needed some help, and like I said before, he didn't have very many friends that could give him that. He was also the black sheep of the family, so I knew he wasn't getting any kind of support from them. He was really close to his sister, and I did reach out to her on Facebook to express my concerns. I pushed her to talk to him into getting some psychiatric help, because he was slipping past the point of no return. I'm not really sure if she took my messages seriously since we didn't really know each other. Plus, she was at least 6 years younger than us and possibly didn't grasp how serious the situation was becoming. In any case, I'll jump forward now to the part where things start to get really creepy. My boyfriend had made arrangements to hang out with our friend at the park. I didn't really want to go because I felt like I needed a break from him and his nonsensical ranting. I just couldn't deal with it on that particular day. My boyfriend said he wasn't all that bad, and we went anyway. We get to the park, and he is his usual self, ranting about Egypt and made-up gods that only he knew the truth about. He also had this large hunting knife that he kept fiddling with the whole time we were on a walk. He told us that he had been using it in ceremonial magic and that it helped to banish negative thoughts. It made me very uneasy. He would do this thing where he would take the knife and make stabbing motions at things, all while holding a conversation with me or my boyfriend. I think we were both really on edge and didn't know what to do or say about it. I tried to distract him from doing it by bringing up other subjects that might interest him, but he kept on with his ritual. Keep in mind we're walking on a trail, so it wasn't like we could just say goodbye then and there. We had to walk back to our car and drop him off at his car. My boyfriend had the bright idea that we should get some lunch after our walk, even though I was doing my best to give him a look that said, "No dude, you're crazy. Why do you think I want to spend any more time with this nut?" But it must have not been very effective, or my boyfriend was ignoring it. Not sure. Either way, we ended up getting in the car to go get lunch. In the car I was driving, my boyfriend was in the passenger seat and our weirdo friend was in the back. As we were heading through a busy part of town, where all the shopping and restaurants are, I hear the distinctive sound of a belt buckle coming undone. Then I hear the worst sound imaginable. I peek back out of the corner of my eye and my suspicions are confirmed. This crazy dude was fully jacking off in our back seat. I mean pants all the way down and bare ass on the seat, beating it so hard it was like he wanted to rip it off. Instantly I felt sick to my stomach and all the nervous energy I had throughout the day popped up into my head. I was trying to not shake and trying to ignore it and drive through heavy traffic. I kind of had a freeze response, I guess. The whole time I kept thinking about that huge ass knife he had in his pocket, and obviously he was completely off his rocker now. I was afraid to say anything or confront him because I didn't know how he was going to react. This part is nuts, but my boyfriend didn't seem to notice, and the whole time he kept rambling on about who knows what. I couldn't listen because my thoughts were 100% focused on driving and trying to act like I didn't know what was going on in my back seat. We get to the restaurant and my boyfriend runs inside to grab food. I'm left alone in the car with our friend and I try to act like I'm browsing on my phone, when really I'm watching and listening as hard as I can. We don't talk. My boyfriend gets back and I complain that I'm tired. It's been a long day, let's drop him off. So I drive us back to our friend's car and he doesn't get out of our vehicle. He's just sitting there. I have to get a little bit rude and ask him to please get out and go home. He gets out of our car and walks over to his passenger side. I start getting really scared and I suspected the worst. He pulls out a gun of some kind of bag he had on the seat and he just walks over to our car with it. I don't know why the heck I did this, but I was so mad, I got out of my car and walked up to him. I was maybe 3 feet away and could see it was a loaded 9mm. I kept asking over and over, "What are you doing?" Because apparently that's all my brain could think to do. I told him to get into his car and go home. He never said anything during this whole time, just kind of cried and had this wild look in his eye. For whatever reason, he got back into his car and drove off. I told my boyfriend obviously we are never hanging out with him again and that I don't even want to talk to him anymore. No contact. A few months pass and he occasionally messages me through the PlayStation or texts my phone. He says a lot of random stuff and I ignore it. It turns out he moved to Tennessee near Nashville. I don't know why. He had a roommate and I think their girlfriend lived there. I'm not really sure about the situation. I think maybe he's turning his life around and getting a fresh start down there. I think it's best to cut all contact and let him regroup. I'm not interested in any kind of friendship with him, and I know he needed help beyond what I could offer. Again, I reached out to his sister and let her know that he had a gun. She managed to get it from him somehow, but it did very little good in the end. I get a call around 11 p.m. one night that wakes me up. It's a man claiming he's a detective down in Gallatin, Tennessee, and my heart skips a beat. I start sweating and immediately ask what happened. Apparently, my former friend stabbed somebody to death on Halloween Day. I don't know all the details, and the articles about it are kind of sparse. The whole thing is really surreal, and I'm just left feeling like I'm lucky that I didn't get shot last summer. This whole thing turned out way longer than I meant it to be, but that's the story. I'm still feeling creeped out by the whole ordeal, and I'm kind of feeling sick after writing all of this. Being followed home is not uncommon where I am from, and it is sadly not rare either. Men will see you walk at night or even during the day sometimes and catcall to get your attention. No matter how often it happens, it is not something you can get used to, and it is scary to be in that situation. This night, I was with my ex walking him home. He was a horrible boyfriend and he got extremely drunk, forcing me to walk with him home and make sure he went inside. I asked him to call a taxi for me because my phone was dead, and he agreed and went inside. I stood outside of his apartment waiting, but as time went by, I realized that the taxi is probably not coming. At the time, I thought they forgot to send a car, but now I realized that probably my ex didn't even call. He just passed out. It was December and very cold outside. I was angry at my ex for getting drunk, angry at the taxi company for forgetting to send a car, and angry at everything and everyone. It was almost midnight, and if you have read my previous experiences, you will understand why I didn't want to walk home, even though it was a 15-minute walk. As I am waiting, I see a Jeep park a little further away from me. The guy gets out of the car and leans on it, just staring at me. After a couple of minutes, I realize that he is waiting on me to approach him, and if I don't, he'll be the one to make the move. I panic and start thinking what to do. I have two options. One is to walk home and risk him coming into my street, which is dark and a great place to hurt someone. A 15-minute walk is plenty of time to get hurt. Or my second option is to walk to my grandma's house, which is 5 minutes away, but the whole street to hers is really dark and pretty much empty. She lives on a street that is mostly stores and offices. She refused to sell her house when other people did, so there aren't many houses around her. I couldn't go to my ex's apartment because I had to be buzzed in and it was midnight. I decide to go to my grandma's and start quickly walking. The guy, of course, gets into his car and starts driving behind me. I pretend that I'm on a call in hopes that he wouldn't do anything if I was on the phone with someone. As soon as I see my grandma's house, I start running and quickly go into her yard. Everybody's asleep, so my best bet is to ring the bell because I don't have a key and hope someone might be awake. Thankfully, my uncle is. I tell him someone is following me. He drives a Jeep and I'm scared he might hurt me. My uncle does not hesitate. He runs out on the cold December night in his shorts and t-shirt and sees the guy. He yells to me, "Is this him?" The guy sees this and pretends he is on the phone and gets into his car and drives away. My uncle calls a taxi for me and waits until the taxi gets there. I thought that would be it. As soon as I got into the taxi, I felt safe. I tell the driver my address, and as soon as he turns, we see the car. He tries to follow the taxi. At this point, I have absolutely no clue what his intentions are. Is he armed? Does he want to hurt me because I got my uncle on him? I start crying and quickly explain to the driver what's going on. He was an older gentleman, and I felt he had been waiting on this moment his whole life. He told me not to worry that he will lose him. He won't allow for the guy to see where I live. He did lose him, mostly because the Jeep guy gave up and just left, but the taxi driver got to feel like a hero, and I got to get home safely. So I met up with a dude who was coming on too strong and kept pressuring me to meet him in a secluded park before our movie date. I told him if we met at a park at all, it had to be one of my choice, which he agreed to. We met. As we walked, he suggested walking down a dark path, which I disagreed with. Then he suggested that we go catch our movie. I went to my car and was going to meet him there, and this dude literally ran away and drove off. I was shocked and laughed and realized he blocked me from everything. Then I started to realize how strange things were. I told my friend, and she used her amazing research skills and found this guy's name, which he was completely lying about. Well, guess what? She got on Tinder and eventually matched with him. And the things he was saying were uncanny. First of all, he was lying about simple things and used exact phrases he used on me, like if I were clean, etc. Then he also tries to meet my friend at a park that he tried to get me to go to, which is super secluded. What throws me off was his defensive comments about sex when it came up in conversation, and how as soon as it was brought up, he talked nonstop. He also kept telling me to wear a skirt in all black. He talked about my clothes a lot on those 3 days we spoke, and really wanted details on what I was going to wear. He was a conventionally handsome guy who should have no trouble getting women, but I don't know. Something just rubbed me off so wrong. His talk about sex makes me think he wanted to spread something, and he met me just to see if I was a good candidate. Clarification, I did not wear what he insisted I wear. And I did not tell my friend to meet him. She matched with him while I was literally still parking in my car, explaining everything that happened. I did not meet him at the park he wanted me to, and I met him at a very busy public park. I believe the STD thing because he kept talking about sex, asking if I had anything, wanting to know my sex history, and looking very sickly. In his pictures, he was muscular. In person, he had sunken eyes and was very thin, which reminded me of people with untreated HIV I see at work often. I know I was dumb. I have bipolar disorder, and mania does blind my judgment, and I was not thinking clearly. I just wanted a thrill and had this urge to feel something. It's not okay, and I agree. Years ago, when I lived in a small mill town with my then boyfriend, a crackhead used to come regularly to my door. We lived in a small old mill house that costed about $400 a month. I had just moved out of my parents' house, and $400 was a pretty good deal for being right outside of the fairly large city. However, there were some consequences that came with living in such an affordable home. There was a local crackhead that would always go door to door asking for handouts. She was a middle-aged lady who was clearly on some serious drugs and didn't take no for an answer. My first encounter with her was not a direct one. I was in the shower when I heard my pit bull aggressively barking. She never does this, by the way. I call out to my boyfriend, but there is no answer. I quickly wash my hair out and get out of the shower to figure out what is going on. As I walk out to the living room, I found my dog, who was whimpering and staring at our front door. We had a glass door, as well as my boyfriend's shotgun leaning up against the wall next to the door. Odd. I freak out a little bit because my boyfriend's car was gone. I try calling him to find his phone ringing on the couch. At this point, I'm not sure if I should call the cops or wait, as my ex was a jerk and would probably scold me for worrying if there was, in fact, nothing wrong. After about 10 minutes of anxiously considering my options, my jerk boyfriend pulls back into our driveway with the woman in his front seat. He eventually comes back in and explains that she came to the door asking for a ride to the gas station to get kerosene for her heater. I didn't understand why he brought his gun to answer the door, but I wasn't going to ask any more questions. After this, she would constantly come to our door asking for different things like cigarettes, beer, and more rides to different places. My ex would always oblige. One night she came to the door asking for, I believe, alcohol, but we didn't have any to give, so she asked my ex for $5. He gave her the money and came back inside. This was my breaking point. I told him that I didn't feel comfortable with her coming to the door and that we had to stop giving her things. I would normally be more than happy to help somebody out, but for her to come to the door every other day was becoming too much. I told him that every time he wasn't home for her, she would continuously bang on the door for about 10 minutes and eventually yell out a vulgar comment about me and storm off. He said that he didn't want to say no and didn't know how to get rid of her. One night my ex wasn't home and I had a work friend over for dinner and drinks. It was around 10 p.m. when I got a knock at the door. It was the crackhead. She asked me for a ride and I told her I had guests over and couldn't. She then proceeded to put her hand against my door as if to hold it open and asked me where the man was, my ex. I told her he wasn't home. My girlfriend walked over to make sure I was okay. The crackhead told us that she needed to go to McDonald's because she's a diabetic and her doctor said that she needed to be on a special diet of hamburgers. My friend, who's in the medical field, told her that doesn't seem sound. Angrily, the crackhead said they make her special hamburgers. Over it, I began to shut the door, but she pushed back. Well, can I have a beer? She asked. I shot her a dirty look for trying to fight back about shutting my door. I told her no, and with the help of my friend, we finally got the door shut as she screamed. Well, what about a cigarette? She sat outside my house waiting until she eventually walked away. I told my ex about the incident and we finally agreed to not answer anymore. My 35 female ex-friend, 36 male, let's call him Will, and I met in early middle school through a mutual friend. I always kind of got the feeling that he liked me, but we were never super close and he never made any kind of actions, and I never felt romantic feelings toward him. So I let it go. Fast forward to a few years ago, we bonded over our love of watching professional hockey games. I moved to the city for college and he's remained in our hometown 4 hours away. In the meantime, he'd married a very nice woman whom I met a few times, and he even brought her to the city for one of our periodic visits. Sometimes in the summer, we would go to baseball games. One year, we traveled to a neighboring city to go to an on-the-road hockey game. The city was only 2 hours from my house, so we came there. We drove, watched the game, saw the sights, and drove back to my house later that night. He crashed on my couch and left in the morning. Here's where it takes a turn. I'd let Will know that I could take over driving if he got tired. He later told me there were a couple of times he got dicey there, but he didn't say anything at the time and drove the whole way. He also tailgated constantly. Needless to say, I felt unsafe in the car. A few days later, I posted a pot of chili I'd made on Instagram. He then told me through 3 different mediums, Facebook, Instagram, and text, that he'd love to come over for dinner and he could be there ASAP. Keep in mind, it's a 4-hour drive between our houses. That, coupled with the fact that I knew he was having marital trouble, his wife was in a traumatic car accident before they met and is still struggling with health issues, so sometimes can't fully engage, and that I'd always had the feeling he liked me, made me uncomfortable enough to ask for some space. Surprise, surprise, he didn't respect my boundaries, which led me to go no contact. I posted on Facebook warning our friends about his behavior and blocked him, told him not to text or contact me again. Good news, I have since moved. He has no idea where I live. I've made it clear to friends not to tell him and that they've all understood and said that they noticed erratic behavior from him. Fast forward another few years, out of the blue, he tags me in a year in review post in which he took a video of him burning the book I wrote. I'm an author and published a short story collection a few years ago from a brand new username that I'd never known about and thus had not been able to block. I blocked this one and posted another message to my friends, who offered a lot of great help and advice. Since he hasn't made any overt threats and physically stalked me, I can't legally do anything but jokes on him. He already paid me for the book, and hundreds of physical copies still live in the world, as well as master docs on my and my publisher's computers. Congratulations on failing to hurt my feelings. This happened about 15 years ago when I had just come home from college on winter break. Home this time was not the house I grew up in. My parents had just moved closer to our small city, so it just didn't feel the same to be in a different space. Maybe that's what triggered my worry. In my family, I'm always the one thinking of worst case scenarios, generally distrustful and mostly seeming like the annoying worry person. Call it what you will, but it's also the gift of fear, am I right? One cold night, my parents had gone to bed upstairs and the dog had followed suit. I thought I'd watch TV in the living room for a bit before going to sleep and settled in on the couch. The living room was in the front of the house, and the recent move, the shutters on the windows weren't there at the time, only see-through curtains that weren't really drawn. I noted this, but was used to our rule setting when the only ones who could see in were the neighbors we knew so well. I'm watching TV for about a half hour when the screen cuts out. It just goes snowy, you know? This was back in the days when you watched whatever your local cable channels brought you. I looked up from whatever I was doing, probably texting, maybe with a flip phone. At first thinking, well, that sucks, but something felt off. I tried the remote, but no other channels worked, and so I was sitting there thinking what I should do instead, when my cat jumped up on the windowsill and started wailing. That may seem innocuous, but anybody who knew my cat knew this was not par for the course. He was pacing and wailing out the window. A feeling of dread washed through me and I was frozen. That feeling of dread is so fiercely visceral. Like, what the heck is going on? What is out there? I try to settle myself down in this unfamiliar dark house and feel a bit better because what are the chances? But then there it was. I swear on all that I have that this cold waft of air blew through and that I heard the side door. I didn't realize that door was there at the time. I heard a door on the side of the house and felt cold air. I became unfrozen and I bolted. I ran upstairs to wake my parents and slumbering dog and frantically tell them that somebody is trying to get into the house. They, I think, were annoyed. I'm a worrier, remember. Still, they get up and I think try to placate me by looking around the house. They go check all of the rooms, including the basement, while I'm scared and exasperated. They are sleepily roaming about in the dark rooms, unarmed, when who knows who has probably made it inside already. Well, they didn't find anything. They verbally patted me on the head and said goodnight, and I felt foolish. That is, until the next morning. I don't know what prompted my parents to call the police, but they showed up and asked me how I knew somebody was out there. Whoa, hold up, what? I started answering. Well, the cat was meowing a lot on that windowsill, and my voice trailed off, waiting for the reaction I usually get, which I got. The cop smirks. A cat, huh? Okay, bro, get on with it. He goes on to say that somebody cut the cable wires on the side of the house, that either somebody thought they were disarming some alarm, or they saw me sitting watching TV and wanted to mess with me. And the side door. Muddy grounds gave us the ability to see the fresh tracks right up to it. It didn't look like it had been fooled with, but I know what I heard, whatever it was. I knew it, I said to my parents. The triumphant feeling was short-lived when I started to mull over what I was so sure about had been true. True, I did know somebody was out there. I also knew I would always check that side door and take some cues from the cat just to be safe. My girlfriend and my mother hated each other. My girlfriend and I had been dating for several years since college. She was about 3 years older than me and had been married and divorced when she was quite young. When I first saw her, I thought she was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. When things were going well with her, our relationship was like magic. Whenever we were together, the rest of the world seemed like vague blur happening distantly outside of our little paradise. We had never taken our relationship to the next level of living together or marriage for 2 reasons. Firstly, it was pretty unstable. About every other month, she would break off with me for about a week. Then she would call me and get back together because she was incredibly lonely and missed me, as she really had no other friends. She was always playing games with me, saying these vague statements that could be interpreted any number of ways, inventing imaginary guys who were crazy about her to make me jealous. This all should have been a huge warning to me because she was very attractive and super intelligent, yet she had an incredibly hard time making social contact with anyone other than me. I had been a very shy, awkward guy in high school, and she was the first attractive woman who ever showed an interest in me. So basically, I was a sucker for her and forgave her game playing and other devious behavior. Also, the connection we had when things were going well was so deep and almost magical. I had never felt anything quite like that connection in my life. The second reason is that I was living with my mom because my mom was mentally ill with schizophrenia and needed me around in case things got out of hand. My girlfriend resented that very much, and my mother hated my girlfriend as she viewed her as a threat. I had not told my girlfriend the extent of my mom's mental illness, so she just thought I was a mama's boy. One day I came home from work and found out that my mom was dead. She died in a freak accident. I did not want to stay in the house when I found my mother, so I moved in with my girlfriend until I could find a place, or we decided to make the arrangement permanent. My girlfriend immediately started complaining that I was emotionally distant. Yeah, no shit. Weird things started to happen. I told my girlfriend I had a nightmare about my mom reaching out of the grave to grab my ankle with a cold, clammy hand, like in the movie Carrie. The next morning, I woke up from the same nightmare. My ankle was wet, as if somebody had wet their hand and grabbed it. My girlfriend was asleep next to me with her hands tucked right under her chest. Obviously, she had wet her bed and grabbed my ankle to trigger that dream again. So you're probably saying, this story is crap. This guy just had a run-of-the-mill crazy girlfriend. But now, the really awful stuff begins. 2 weeks later, I was at my mom's place cleaning up, and my best friend since grade school dropped by. We stayed late talking, and I missed dinner with my girlfriend. I got my buddy to drive me back to her place, and when I went upstairs, the whole apartment was dark, and she didn't answer when I called her name. I went into the bathroom and turned on the light. The wall around the switch was streaked with blood. It looked like something the Manson family would have done. Blood all over the frickin' wall. I whipped around, and my girlfriend was sitting on the floor by the tub with blood soaking her blouse and jeans. She told me that somebody broke in and tried to kill her. I stayed in the relationship for another month or so, but at that moment, I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to get out. Everything blew up soon after when she, I am almost 100% sure, faked a pregnancy and then insisted on getting an abortion. Of course, likely also faked, because she didn't want to have a child that might inherit my mom's illness. My mom's diaries that I read later really truly revealed how much she didn't like her. My girlfriend, that is. Death and unhappiness seemed to follow my ex-girlfriend. Just before I met her, when she broke up with her ex-boyfriend, he left her place and got stinking drunk, and later that night, he ran over a man and his son crossing the road, killing them both. When I spoke to her one last time a few years later, I found out about another incident. My by this time ex-girlfriend had gone to New York for a work-related meeting, and she brought some bed bugs from her motel. Her apartment building became infested with bed bugs for over a year, and her next-door neighbor ended up dying as well. They had engaged in several huge arguments over this, talking about the bed bug situation. Another death she had a hand in was her ex-husband. I found out from a mutual friend that after she and I finally broke up, she started contacting him again and continually led him on to believe they'd be back together. This went on for several years, and when she told him finally that it would never happen and they would always be nothing more than friends, he was found dead a year later. With no proof who has been doing the killing, we were never able to get justice. She obviously tried to destroy my psyche, but at least things didn't go that far with me. This took place around 2015. My ex, 26, and I, 25, lived in an apartment that was basically a house split up into 3 apartments. We had the whole top floor, and the downstairs consisted of a medium-sized apartment and a small studio-sized apartment. It wasn't a great neighborhood, high crime rates, gang activity, and stuff, but I had grown up in the area on and off over the years, so I felt fairly comfortable. Anyways, the medium-sized apartment was occupied the whole time by some douche who we tried to not interact with much. But the studio was empty when we moved in. Eventually, a couple months into us living there, a guy moved into the studio. He was an older guy, 50s, with long white hair. He presented himself with this wholesome hippie vibe. We, being friendly, decided to invite him up to our place one day to hang out with our friend group. We shared beers, weed, played music, and laughed. I hung out with this person a few times because he seemed fairly harmless. New tenant Jay, my ex, and me. It wasn't long after meeting him that red flags started showing. At one point, he started casually talking about smoking crack and meth. After he left, N and I agreed that as long as he doesn't bring it, the crack or meth around us or smoke in front of us, we will mind our business, but I also said that we shouldn't openly invite him over anymore. Well, he got comfortable knocking on our door at random times of the night whenever he would hear us hanging out with people. And unfortunately, one of our friends ended up being into meth as well and started hanging out with Jay on his own. We shared a stairwell with Jay. The other apartment had its own separate entrance. Eventually, I started coming home to random people hanging out on our dark stairwell waiting for Jay. This is when I really started getting uncomfortable. It was no longer about minding my own business. I was assertive and would ask and state, "Why are you sitting here? Do you live here? Jay isn't here. You need to leave." Coming home late at night to Jay's crack buddies waiting in the dark definitely wasn't a good feeling. I didn't want to be responsible for somebody getting evicted and ending up on the streets because I know that addiction is a heck of a thing, but I ended up telling the landlord what was going on. He just said that he would give Jay a warning and that if there were any more issues, then to let him know. Well, shortly thereafter, N comes home from work with a bewildered look on his face and says Jay is lying in a pool of blood at the bottom of the steps. So immediately I followed him downstairs and saw that Jay was at the bottom on the outside steps, not the stairwell, covered in blood and not moving. We started tapping his shoulder and yelling his name. He eventually started to groan and tried to stand up. I kept telling him not to move and that we were going to call an ambulance. In response to this, he gets freaked out and staggers to his feet, blood pouring from a deep gash in his forehead, and keeps repeating that he's fine. We follow him into a small studio and I start dabbing his wound with some paper towels that were on the counter. I can see how big the gash is and I keep telling him that he probably has a concussion and we shouldn't go to sleep. I asked him what happened, but he just kept mumbling that he didn't know. He eventually pushes us out, keeps repeating out to call an ambulance, and closes the door. Of course, I called 911. I wasn't going to be responsible for him going to sleep and never waking up. Paramedics arrive and I explain the situation, saying how he's refusing help and the extent of his injuries. They start banging on his door, demanding that he open it. He kept yelling and refusing, but he ended up opening it. After this, we didn't see him for about a month. We didn't know if he died or what. Eventually, one day as I'm walking up to my apartment, I see him sitting on the outside step smoking a cigarette. He has stitches all along his forehead and was wearing a neck brace. I said something like, "Hey, what happened that night?" He explains that he had a concussion, a fractured vertebrae, and a broken hip, and had to be airlifted to a hospital in the city. But for some reason, the next thing he said was the most chilling to me. It might not seem that creepy to others, but this bothered me for the rest of the time that I lived there. He said that all he really remembers is being at the bottom of the steps, lying in his own blood, and someone pulling his ring off of his finger while saying, "You don't need this where you're going." The thought of someone callously assaulting someone to the point of near death, then stealing a ring off of him and just leaving him there to die, just shook me to the bone. Anna and I lived there for about a year and a half. The landlord eventually kicked Jay out soon after he arrived back from the hospital. I'll try and keep this story as short as I can, but so much of what makes it creepy is in the details and atmosphere surrounding my experience. My mom and I decided to visit Nevada City, California on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining and logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures of Google if you really want to see a creepy town. It looks haunted without even having to try. After eating lunch, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. This cemetery was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are because of the high mortality rate of the time. Lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper cemetery with large ornate tombs, mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots, etc. But what's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. Spooky, but this isn't a paranormal story. As we followed the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it became hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents, bags of trash, etc. Luckily, the trees were opening up and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large solitary juniper tree, tall brush, and a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something and it turned out to be a purse, like a large designer purse, and it looked super old, like it had been there for a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing, but then I noticed to my horror a tangled mass of hair, and I froze. You ever know something without actually knowing something? I knew that this was a dead woman's body down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. "Hey, get your phone and call the police. That's a dead body over there." And she immediately started dialing 911, because like me, she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we have our attention turned away from the corpse. We looked back at the body, and I kid you not, she was sitting up with her back turned toward us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat, and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than lying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder like something out of a horror movie and spotted us. She literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and turned to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing, and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly advanced on us, in a jerking or lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep her covered. My first thought was that she had been assaulted. She kept trying to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short high-pitched squeaks. As she closed in on me, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into a horrible smile. It still haunts me. And suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself, and we had to shout at her to stop. By this point, we had the cops in the way. We said we had found somebody in serious distress, but be that as it may, we both knew that this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away, turned, and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said whoever we found must have fled because they didn't find her. I really hope she's okay and gets the help she needs, though. This encounter happened decades ago, before the time of cell phones and internet. It's a cautionary tale, and I'm glad I now have the opportunity to share it with total strangers. Years ago, on a beautiful early September afternoon, my brother and a couple of his friends and me and a couple of mine went to a local county fair. While there, we met a group of 4 guys in merged groups. We were having so much fun, popping back to the cars occasionally to drink a beer and smoke, that we decided to keep the party going after we left the fair. Everybody followed me to my apartment, where we called another friend whose family owned the local single-story motel. She hooked us up with a room at the end, far away from other guests, and we were off to the races. It was a fun night. Lots of laughing, conversation, and drinking. I really enjoyed chatting with one of the new guys. Nothing flirty or romantic, just similar interests, but there was another one who I didn't like. He was very competitive with the other guys, bragging himself up and consistently making fun of them. He didn't add anything interesting to conversations, wasn't very bright, and had a locker room style humor that I've never enjoyed. No big deal, not everybody clicks. I probably didn't say more than a couple of words to him that night. The party eventually ended and everybody went their separate ways. A couple of weeks later, I'm home alone on a Saturday night when I hear the doorbell ring. I open up and it was the annoying guy. He told me that he's cruising town with a friend and asked if I'd like to join them. I was honestly pretty bored, so I agreed to go and we headed downstairs. The car was the type with 2 bucket seats in the front, a dip between them with an emergency brake in it, and a bench seat in the back. When the annoying guy told me to slide over in the front to sit between him and the driver, I laughed and said, "That wouldn't be comfortable at all," and climbed into the back. We start rolling and I noticed that the driver wasn't one of the other 3 guys we met at the fair. I felt a bit disappointed but sucked it up. After all, the annoying guy's other friends were amazing and this guy might be too. I threw out a conversation starter. Crickets from the driver and more urging from AG to crawl into the front seat. I tried another topic. Same response, and now I'm picking up tense vibes from the driver. I don't know what AG had intended, but all my alarm bells were going off and I wanted out. I coolly tapped the driver on the shoulder, said I decided to go home and turn in early, and he promptly turned around and headed back to my place. In the 5 minutes I was in his car, he hadn't said one word to me, but I swear I felt him relax immediately when I ended the evening. At home, I got out of that car as fast as I could, said bye and headed up the walk. I heard the car back up and drive away with relief, but when I got to the door of my building, something made me turn around. AG was right behind me. I was pissed. "Better run if you want to catch a ride," I said. "It's too late. I'll never catch him," he said. "Well, guess you're walking home in the dark then." "Okay, but I need to use your bathroom first." Folks, I ended up saying okay for a lot of predictable reasons. I was young, didn't have much of a backbone, and had been raised like most girls to be polite. It was obvious he was creeping on me and might actually have dark intentions. I was furious with him and I still said okay. Everything turned all right, but I still hate that's what happened. Please learn from my mistakes. Screw politeness. I let us into the apartment and stayed by the door while he used the bathroom. He comes out and I'm holding the door open for him, and he plops onto the far right end of the couch. He kind of slides back, cups his hand behind his neck, puts his feet on my coffee table. Then, wearing an I win grin, he tells me he's not going anywhere. I stand there numbly for a bit, mentally flipping through my options. It's important to note here that I was never physically intimidated by AG. I'm 5'11" in my stocking feet and was 125 pounds at the time. So slim, but definitely not petite. I'd also been holding my own in roughhousing sessions with my brothers for years. AG was maybe 5'4" and kind of small. Obviously not to be trusted, but not capable of overpowering me by brute force alone. At this point, I'm standing in front of a narrow piece of wall between the door on my right and the end of the sofa on my left, both within the touching distance. The outrage and fury overtake me, and I know what I'm going to do. I surprise him by grabbing his shirt front with both hands, pulling him up and to the right, then shoving him against the narrow wall space. I place my left forearm across his chest, pin him with all my weight, while opening the door with my right hand. I hold the door with my right foot, grab his shirt front again, and push him into the hall. All this happening lightning quick. As the door was closing in his face, he said, "But I'll have to walk all the way across town," and I yelled through the door, "Should have thought of that before you got out of the damn car." Never saw him again, but a few weeks later there was a knock at my door. I answered. It was a local man with cerebral palsy, flanked by 2 of his buddies. He told me he wanted to take me for a really nice dinner and to buy me a bottle of champagne. The champagne comment was so random and specific that it kept spinning in the back of my head. I told him no, that I don't date strangers, and I thought it was bizarre that he was doing this. As they turned to go, the pieces fell into place, and I said, "Wait a minute. Were you told to come here by a short red-headed guy named AG?" He confirmed that was indeed the case. In all of these years later, I still believe AG told the guy with cerebral palsy that I was a prostitute, and a bottle of champagne was my code phrase for customers. Such a nasty little creep. In the mid to late 1970s, my parents were in a camping club with about 5 or 6 other couples and camped at various campgrounds together around the Midwest. We are from Chicago. One time we went to this campground that had a little park near a large pond with a playground not far from the water. My sister and I were playing in a sandbox. I was around 10 and she was a couple of years younger. After having already gone on the swings and seesaw earlier, suddenly out of nowhere, this boy, who was probably about 12 or 13, wearing a black t-shirt and bell-bottom jeans with patches on the knees, was standing in the sandbox a few feet from us. He had long black hair down to his shoulders and dark eyes. He didn't say anything for a couple of seconds, and my sister and I looked at him nervously as he wasn't smiling and staring down at us. "Are you brother and sister?" he finally asked. I told him yes, we were. "Are you camping here?" "Yes," I said. "Where's your camper?" I stupidly, without thinking, told him the section of the campground my parents' club was camping at, which was about 2 blocks away. "Do you guys know who the Johnsons are?" he asked, referring to the name of one of the couples camping in our parents' club. "I don't remember their real name." I told him yes. "Well, they're my aunt and uncle. I'm going to surprise them later that I'm here," he said. He went on to say he was camping with his dad, and he gestured vaguely in a direction on the other side of the pond. The kid squatted down close to my sister. She backed up in the sand closer to me. "You guys look so alike. You can definitely tell you're related," he said, which was kind of ironic since I'm adopted and my sister is my parents' natural child. We did both have brown hair and eyes in common though. "Did you guys want to come to my camp? My dad brought tons of snacks with. I can give you marshmallows to roast if you want." I told them my parents already have marshmallows. "Well, we have graham crackers and Hershey bars too, so you can make s'mores. I'll give you some of them to take back to your camp." I lied and said that we have them too, as tempting as s'mores sounded. My younger sister finally said she needed to go to the bathroom, which I took as my cue to get away from this weird kid who was really starting to make me feel uncomfortable even at that young age. "We're going to go now. We'll see you later when you come to your aunt and uncle's," I told him. He didn't get up when we got up, but instead leaned closer to us. "There are bathrooms right down that road," pointing again past the pond, "by where your camper is. You can take her there and then stop by and get some candy from my dad." I told him there was a bathroom right over by the main office, which was just across the street from the playground. "We'll just use that one." Suddenly the boy jumped up, kicked whatever my sister and I had been building in the sand, and jumped out of the sandbox. "You are so dumb. Who turns down free candy?" "That's okay, more for me then." My sister and I rushed over to the office building, and I was fearful that he would follow us there, but after a few seconds of staring at us, he turned around and began to run down the path towards the other side of the pond. I took my sister into the men's room. She did her thing, and we cautiously looked around for the boy, who was nowhere to be seen, before we hurried back to our campsite. Once there, I told my parents about what happened, and the Johnsons happened to be sitting on the picnic table having coffee with them, and we told them it was their nephew who was going to surprise them. Of course, they said they didn't have a nephew, but they were a bit weirded out that somebody knew who they were. My sister and I stayed at the campsite the remainder of our time there, and of course the creepy kid never did come to our campsite. Forgive me guys, I am new to Reddit. I came on here to post a story my dad recently told me that he hasn't told anybody about until now. Quick backstory. My dad is a retired park ranger, if that's what you call it. He worked for the National Park Service up until 3 years ago. His usual tasks involve taking people on tours along the Appalachian Trail, maintaining the forestry and the wildlife habitats that live there. So anyway, this story goes back to the summer of 2003 when my dad and a colleague, we shall call him John, were sent out to try and locate an adult elk. A male named Billy by the locals, who was usually very tame and was often found close to houses, but had not been seen for over a week. This was apparently very unusual for him, so my dad was dropped off along the trail, while John took the truck and drove further down approximately 5 miles in order to try and locate Billy. They had been searching all day for him, and this was the last stop for the day, and there were only a few hours of daylight left. So as the story goes, my dad had been walking along the trail for a little over an hour when he heard a disturbance in the distance off to his left. He could hear the snapping of tree branches, so he decided to follow where the noises were coming from, in the hopes that it could be Billy the elk. As he got closer, he said he began to smell a foul odor and instinctively knew that it was some sort of dead animal. He was right. Lying on the ground in a small opening of trees was the carcass of a large elk. He could see by the tag on one of the ears that it was Billy. However, he was immediately shocked by the condition the animal was in. Billy had been severely mutilated. His eyes and tongue had been gouged out, his throat torn out, and his stomach had been ripped open so that his intestines were protruding on the floor. He also noticed that little chunks of flesh had been bitten in from the torso, and the entire front right leg was missing. He reasoned that the animal had been attacked by either a black bear or coyotes, and nothing else would tackle a fully grown adult elk. However, this seemed strange because elk were usually too big for even apex predators to try to take down, but he thought that maybe a hungry pack of coyotes might if they were starving. What disturbed him further was the way in which the animal had been mutilated after death. My dad made a point of saying he had never witnessed anything quite like it, and that it was very unusual for predators to mutilate a corpse in such a way. Feeling unnerved by this discovery, my dad radioed John and told him he had located the animal before giving him his approximate location. John had told him that he had wandered off the beaten track and that it would take him around an hour to get back to where the truck was parked and drive back to his location. So, my dad was told to wait where he was until John got to him. It was almost dark at this point, and my dad remembered beginning to feel very unsettled. He had a flashlight with him and bear spray, but noted that he still felt very vulnerable alone in the forest. After around 15 minutes or so, he heard the same noises as he heard earlier, much closer now that he was off the trail. He would hear footsteps and the occasional growl of something hidden within the thick bushes straight ahead of him. He said that every so often he could hear slow, heavy breathing and the snapping of branches as whatever it was paced the forest floor. He began to get the feeling that he was being watched and worried that the coyotes, or perhaps even a bear, were now stalking him. He said that every so often he would wave his flashlight in the direction of the disturbance and yell in order to try and scare off whatever it was that was watching him. However, the noises still persisted, and this seemed to aggravate the creature. Luckily, the animal never came any closer or revealed itself to him, simply pacing around in the darkness and letting out the occasional growl. Just over an hour later, the truck pulled up along the trail, and my dad could see, to his relief, that John was now following the flashlight to where my dad now stood. The arrival of another person must have spooked the harasser, as he noticed hearing the crunching of leaves now moving quickly away from them. He told him what had happened, and the man reasoned that it may have been a bear, and that they probably shouldn't hang around. Together they wrapped the corpse in a cloth and managed to haul it into the back of the truck. My dad said that just as they were getting ready to leave, curiosity came over him, and he decided to walk over to where the sounds had been coming from only moments before. John got out as well, and two of them scoured the area. Behind a fallen log, they found the half-chewed leg of the dead elk, along with a number of discarded candy and chocolate bar wrappers and a small length of rope. Further back into the tree line, they found a pair of nitrile gloves covered in blood and human shoe prints leading away from them. They also discovered the remnants of a small fire in a comic book. This had terrified my dad. The realization that it had been a person that had mutilated the elk that had been watching him from the bushes and growling, so much so that he and John had agreed to never mention the encounter to anyone. My dad has told me that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what he saw that day, and he still struggles to comprehend what the person was doing out there in the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, how they managed to kill the elk, and what their intentions were towards my dad. We relocated from the area in 2005 and now reside near Richmond, Virginia. My dad hasn't been back since and has said that he will never walk the Appalachian Trail again. I can't blame him, to be honest. Anyways, thank you for listening to my story. This took place about a year ago at my job. I work as a part-time cashier at a grocery store, in a mostly empty strip mall, where the hours for the self-checkout station run from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. At the time I was 18 or 19, depending on the month, and I was regularly doing the self-checkout shift. I'm a young woman, average all around, but it's not unusual for strange men to come through the store and make obscene comments. Our self-checkout area backs up to a bank with an ATM, so generally, I would have my back to the bank while I watched the registers. This was about 7 or 8 p.m. at this point. I'm a little bit away from my station, talking with another one of my coworkers, Angela. She no longer works at the store, but she's an older woman, mid-40s, and nice enough. In the middle of our conversation, somebody clears his throat, and I move out of the way so Angela could take his order. His eyes never left me as he said I was a very pretty young girl, to which I thanked him because I just wanted the conversation to end. He continued saying I looked delicious and very soft. He even used the word supple, which I remember because I thought it was really weird. At this point I'm uncomfortable, so I reluctantly leave Angela's lane to go back to my station. However, I stay standing to watch and make sure she's okay. After he's done paying, I think this is the end of it, but he comes over to use the ATM. The whole time he's mumbling about how nice I must be and how pretty girls like you never make it to the car. I got my manager, who asked him to leave as he was making me uncomfortable. As he leaves, he tells me to watch out tonight and that I would never be found. I don't drive due to my eye conditions. I go outside and wait for my mom to pick me up for my shift. Obviously, I asked my coworker to walk me out to the car. We saw him at the end of the sidewalk. He watched us and my coworker wouldn't leave my side. He wound up driving me home that night while I called my mom to explain what happened. I don't know why I didn't call the police. Something to do with the wishes of the store, but I wish I did. I hope nobody else encountered him. This happened the other day. In my spare time, I sometimes shop for Instacart. It's a cool way to get some extra cash, and I use it as a way to get my 9-month-old son out of the house when we've been cooped up for a while. One evening, I had an order for Target. We headed inside the store like usual and proceeded to start the batch. I'm about 4 items in the procedure section, and at this point 3 people have already made comments to me about how cute my son is. This is a thing anytime we go anywhere. It's all usual and is expected now. Suddenly this older guy, maybe in his early 60s, walks up to my car while I'm looking at avocados and proceeds to hold his hand up to my son as if to signal for a high five, with a huge smile on his face. Normally my son is very friendly. He smiles at strangers all the time when they smile at him and tell him how cute he is. But this time he grabbed my jacket and leaned into me, which is what prompted me to notice the man. I immediately asked him to back up and let him know he was closer to me and my child than I was comfortable with. He then apologized and said he didn't mean any harm. I flashed an obviously fake smile and hurried into a nearby grocery aisle. At this point, my mama bear instinct kicks in, and my eyes are constantly peeled at my surroundings with each aisle we go into. I noticed this guy kind of lagging behind, but going into every aisle we go into. With only a tub of disinfecting wipes in his hand, he tries to act like he's browsing, but I can clearly tell I'm being followed. As we proceed to check out, I go into a lane that had a cashier instead of a self-checkout lane, like I normally would for such a small order. My plan was to notify the cashier that I was being followed and ask for assistance to the car. However, I no longer saw the man at this point, so against my better judgment, I refrained from saying anything. Side note, I also carry a taser and some police-grade mace on my keychain. As we head into the parking lot, I pull out my taser and I'm holding it in my hand as I push the car to my car. I take my son out and put him in his car seat, then proceed to place the groceries in the front passenger seat. I lock the car doors behind me as I go to push the cart to the designated cart area. When I turn around to head back to my car, the same man is at my son's window tapping the glass. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I yelled, "What the heck are you doing? I'm gonna kill you, dude." As I ran over to the car, he immediately looked over at me surprised, as if he didn't think I was coming back to my own car, and ran off. It was at that moment I was so thankful that I locked the car doors, as I always do, to just return the cart. Because just that quick, he may have tried to run off with my child. I was so shaken up I got in the back seat with my son and took him out of his car seat and held him while I called the police. I've never been so scared in my life. I started to cry at the thought of how that could have gone if I didn't lock the doors. I waited for an officer to show up and follow me home to make sure the man didn't try to follow us. That was fun to explain to the customer that watched me pull up with the police to deliver their order. That was one of the scariest moments of my life, and I got choked up just thinking about it. But I know one thing. I would have risked my life in that parking lot to protect my child. Hello. I spend around 2 or 3 hours walking alone during the AM hours. Every night, and have done so for years. Probably 1,000+ hours total. A reason for these walks no longer exists, thus I am stopping it. I have decided to write some of my experiences into a thread, with more later if anyone cares. I will start with my most recent one, which happened a few days ago. I was walking down a path to the entrance to the woods. As I was about to enter, I could see a flashlight walking down a path in the woods coming towards me, appearing to be scouting the area for something. I decided to wait near the entrance until they passed, which is still a few hundred yards from civilization, or any light at all. As they got closer, I could make out a male voice talking to someone over my very loud music. I assumed he was on the phone. Nothing too odd. However, as I expected him to walk past me, he did not. He stood around 4 feet to the side of me. It was really dark, so he was just a silhouette. I could see he had a massive German Shepherd on a leash. He was still noticeably talking, but it didn't seem like he was trying to get my attention. At this point, I turn away and start walking towards the woods when I can clearly hear him shouting something. That is when I pull one earphone out of my ear and hear something to the effect of, "It's the police. Take your earphones out and stop walking away." Realizing that he was in fact shouting at me the entire time, I turn around and say I'm sorry, I didn't know, and all that. He asked for my name, what I'm doing there, and how long I had been there. I tell him. Then he says, "Well, I'm looking for someone and clearly you're not them. Have you seen a girl around here?" To which I replied no, that I hadn't, and then he walks off back into the woods. That is the end of that story. I walked away and went home. Not the creepiest, I know, but I am left with questions. Was he looking for a girl in the dark alone at that time? And also, if he were looking for an armed criminal, appearing to ignore him and walking away could have ended very badly for me. I'm thankful he didn't lose his cool. That is, if he even was a cop. He did say he was, but I never saw his uniform as it was so dark. I have not seen anything on the news. I just hope that girl is okay, whatever happened. My other story is a lot scarier, yet less conclusive. This one started in a local park around a year ago. For context, this park, although in a nice suburban area, is supposedly notorious for being robbed. However, in my countless hours walking there, this is the only vaguely scary experience I have ever had. I have never felt anything but comfortable otherwise. I was standing by an entrance to the park, maybe 20 feet inside of it. 2 a.m. It was pitch black. I could see a few feet in front of me. The only light is the faint twinkle of streetlights beyond the far side of the park. As I am standing there, earphones in with music as always, I could have sworn I seen some movement in the distance. I squint my eyes and focus on a spot on the far side, trying to make out what I noticed, for maybe 10 seconds. At this point, I realize I'm not looking into the distance, I'm looking directly at someone a mere 10 or so feet in front of me. I shit you not, that feeling of realization is the most single powerful thing I've ever felt in my life. Felt like I was in a horror movie. Heart racing, I turn around and book it to the entrance behind me and start walking down the street towards my home. I'm fairly shaken up, but there's nothing to indicate the guy had any sinister intentions or even knew I was there. Could have been doing the same thing as me. I'm now under the streetlights walking past some well-off houses which felt like safety to me. However, I then turned around and saw a hooded man, a stereotypical roadman as we would call them, emerge from the same entrance as me and turned in my direction. He was around the same distance I would have expected that he started leaving the same time as me, around 10 to 15 feet behind me. Again, nothing sinister, probably I thought. But just to be careful, I picked up the pace a bit. This street is around 200 feet before it merges with the main road. After around halfway, I turned around and saw this guy was directly behind me, 10 feet as he was earlier. I think to myself, wow, that's weird. I'm walking pretty fast and this guy has kept up. So now I start to walk as fast as I possibly can without breaking out into a run. I specifically remember going as fast as a walk would allow me to. I maintain this for another 100 odd feet until I get to the main road. Then I turn around and this guy is literally 5 feet behind me. He is closer than he was before I sped up rapidly. Borderline pants shitting moment. I full on ran all the way home, barefoot sliders by the way, without looking behind me until I got to my front door. That was that. Never saw him again. Could be a coincidence, sure. Maybe I happened upon a 2 a.m. power walker, but also maybe I almost got robbed. I don't know. If I had, it would have been in a different subreddit, lol. Thanks for reading or listening if you did. I have more stories too, but I've been writing these for an hour or two and my eyes hurt. For the amount of time I have spent out in the dark, most of which is in the woods, I have surprisingly few stories. Got a few potentially paranormal ones too, but they aren't allowed here I don't think. I consider myself lucky to be honest. I think I was tempting fate for quite some time. This happened only 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it often, and I know without a doubt, me and my patient were almost prey to a predator. I'm a counselor that works for my state. I work with people with substance abuse disorder, the mentally ill, and to a lesser degree, those with slight developmental delays. One aspect of my job with the developmentally delayed is similar to social worker. One thing I have to verify is that the participant is able to achieve their personal goals we set for that year. One of my patients wanted to learn to hike to strengthen herself. When I called to make my visit, she asked if she could show me that she could hike now. I wanted to say, "I believe you," LOL, but she was excited. I packed my hiking shoes and the next day I made the visit. Her and I are actually similar age, 40s. As we were walking the trail, we got to a point that was much more isolated. We were no longer walking the trail that loops around the neighborhood pond with many people, but we were on a trail that took us through the woods in a cotton field. Her and I were walking and talking when she suddenly stopped walking. I looked at her, and just as she went to say, "I have a bad feeling," I had an overwhelming feeling myself that somebody was watching us. Due to her development delays, I felt more concerned for her welfare than my own. It's hard to explain, but I didn't feel fear. I felt a feeling of protecting her. I looked behind us because I heard the sound of leaves crunching, and sure enough, a guy who looked to be in his 30s is suddenly coming out of the woods, and he's slowly creeping up towards us. There was nobody else around, so for this guy to magically come out of the woods and creeping up, I knew whatever he wanted was nefarious. I told her to continue walking, giving her a head start. I don't know why I even did this, but I just completely turned myself around, stopped, and I looked straight at him. I just stared. I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, but as soon as we locked eyes, it was as if he realized, now they know I'm back here, because he froze and stopped walking towards us. I kept staring at him, then I started to walk back towards my patient, so he understood my eyes were on him. Then as I walked backwards, I looked over to see my patient, looked back at him, and he disappeared as fast as he came, back into the woods. If he were just wanting to walk this nature trail, why did he stop as soon as I turned around and stared? Why wouldn't he just continue on his walking past us? This guy was clearly waiting and watching for a woman or women to go down the isolated trail. For him to come out of the woods when he did, it was clear to me that he was out hiding and stalking. I will forever be convinced that my patient's bad feeling and my feeling of being watched saved one or both of us from whatever that man had planned. I really loved reading through all of these chilling entries. My prose is certainly duller than most, but I hope you'll read my tale. I realize that these sort of disclaimers are frowned upon, but oh well. For reference, I am a male of 23 years old. So, in the summer of 2009, I was 18, and I went to stay at a hotel on the beach for a few days with my two friends, Brian and Dude. We went to Cocoa Beach in Florida. I'm an American. As somebody who's moved around a great deal and seen most of the country, Florida is a bit of a strange place. Some parts are ridiculously beautiful, and some are horrifically dilapidated. Though, I guess that's true of many places. For my money, Florida has consistently the best looking women I've ever encountered, especially if you like Latina women. But the thing about Florida is crazy stuff happens there. Lots of insanely violent and strange crimes. So, Ryan, Dude, and I went to Ron John's Surf Shop, which is a huge store where you can buy surfing equipment and apparel. I believe it's a very large chain store. So being young and dumb kids, Dude decides he just wants to steal a Speedo, only for the heck of it. I tell him that if he steals it, I'll wear it on the beach. Dude finds this especially comical. Brian is a very ethical guy, so he wants no part, but Dude steals it anyway. It is getting later in the day, so the beach is getting less crowded. We get back to the hotel and I put on the Speedo. I feel ridiculous in it, but whatever, man. I step out onto the beach as if it's a rakish new swimsuit. Three of us start kicking a soccer ball around, and random people who see me in the Speedo are laughing and giving me sarcastic thumbs up. Things of that nature. I'm smiling back at them, having a great time. I start to bend over to the ground and stretch in very suggestive ways, thrusting my hips forwardly repeatedly and things like that. People continue to find it humorous. All of a sudden, I hear shouting from the distance. About 100 yards, 90 meters away, there is a pier. Underneath the pier are 5 or 6 very rough-looking gentlemen. These men appear homeless, which doesn't really bother me as I've been homeless myself. All of them have extremely tan and leathery skin, and they're covered in very old and faded-looking tattoos. They're all disheveled and toothless and whatnot. They start screaming, "Screw you, Speedo guy," and stuff like that. Again, it still wasn't really a big deal at this point, but now all the other people sort of clear out of the beach in fear of the men. After a while I look up and the group of men is jogging over towards us. Brian, Dude, and I all lock eyes nervously. "Why the heck are you wearing that stuff?" The apparent leader of the group bellows at me. They're just getting close enough for me to see him up close. I'm about 6'2", 190 pounds, and this guy made me look like a little schoolboy with a Power Rangers lunchbox. I have no exactly how tall he was, but he was monstrous and had a blonde mohawk haircut. Now I'm starting to realize that we're going to be the victims of one of Florida's crazy-ass violent crimes. One of the men tosses a really cheap brand beer bottle at the ground in front of me. All the men have glass bottles and the leader is pretending to hold something behind his back. At this point the beach is deserted, just like something out of a movie. They have these predatory looks on their faces as they got right up next to us. To me, it felt like they had a sexual appetite for us. All of a sudden I get an idea. Pretend to be British. I can do a really good English accent based on the accent of Russell Brand. So, I'm like, "Sorry about that there, mate. We didn't realize you Yanks had a dress code. We wear these all the time across the pond, and I swear to you," all of a sudden, the guy gets a big smile on his face and says, "Oh, you guys are from England." All of a sudden, all of the guys are slapping us on the back and laughing. One guy showing Brian a tattoo on his arm, saying he comes from English ancestry. Dude starts talking to him in his best accent too. One guy starts running his hands over my body and squeezing my butt in the Speedo, which was creepy, but better than being stabbed, I guess. I end up making up a story that we come from Yorkshire. I tell him about all the pubs in the tube. Later, I found out that Yorkshire doesn't have a tube, but whatever, I guess. Anyway, the homeless guys all left a little while later and we came out unscathed. I'm just glad we weren't victims of something way more severe. I was involved in 2 encounters that scared the life out of me. The first one is pretty short. In 2011, I had just graduated from university and fell into a light depression. Naturally, I would wake up later than the rest of the household, and given that my room was the loft conversion, which also was an ensuite, any morning noise did nothing to interfere with my sleep. One such morning around 10 a.m., I lightly awoke to some shuffling. I thought it was probably the birds perched on the roof and went back to sleep. However, 20 minutes or so later, some light noise disrupted my sleep again. When I looked in the direction of the noise, I saw 2 blurry faces in the distance, holding the bathroom door ajar. I realized they saw me too, and I couldn't do anything but freeze. Before I knew it, I heard shuffling followed by 2 bangs, which means they jumped on the extension in the garden. I remained frozen in bed like a popsicle until it all died down. 10 minutes later, I checked the ensuite and saw footprints all over the toilet seat, which is just below the windowsill. Bear in mind, the window is tiny and you really need to be a contortionist to fit in there, so how they got in there is a mystery to me. Since then, that window has remained closed. Story 2. Several years later, in 2017, I saw one of my neighbors walking her dog. I had never spoken to her before, so I expected an awkward salutation until we moved towards directions. But it came to pass that she was taking the same route that I was. We got to talking and she told me how much she loves art house movies. This delighted me because I never get to meet people like that in real life, so we exchanged numbers in order that we could recommend movies to each other. For a whole week we were texting about our favorite movies, scenes, and directors. Then one night she called me. I thought it was unusual since we are not cordial enough for a phone call. I answered, "Hello?" but heard nothing other than static. I repeated it a few times and heard nothing but some static and shuffling. After about 2 minutes, I put the phone down and thought she had pocket dialed me. Then she called me again, but this time she was whispering. I told her I couldn't hear a few times. This happened at least 4 times within 5 minutes. I really didn't think a whole lot of it. On the 5th try, I finally heard her, but it was not something anyone wants to hear. "There are people in my house. I am alone underneath the bed. Please call the police for me." I thought she was joking, but quickly realized we aren't that close for her to think that she can play such pranks on me. I told her to remain on the phone with my heart racing. I rushed to the window so I could see her house, diagonal to mine. To my shock, I saw 2 people on the bottom floor. She was breathing heavily over the phone. I asked her where her room was, and she said it was the one facing the street just above the front door. She reached for the tall curtains from underneath the bed and started lightly shaking them. I got her signal. She stayed on the phone. I immediately called the police and explained the situation. They said a few units were on their way post-haste. I knew the cops would take time. For the last few months, I have taken up a casual delivery role of Just Eat, which is a food delivery service like Uber Eats. So, knowing that my knocking on the door to spook the intruders could put me at risk, given they might see my face, I put on my earphones, some stuff in a bag to make it look like a package and a helmet with the face covering, and hopped on the motorcycle, covered the number plates with black tape, located in the garage behind my house, to make it look like I was delivering something. I went all around the street and accelerated towards her property. In the meantime, I told my neighbor not to speak and that I will walk her through everything I am doing. "I'm going to ring the buzzer," I said to her. My heart was beating so fast, I felt faint when my hand touched the buzzer. I cannot describe how difficult it was for me to press it. It was as if I was lifting double my body weight. Now, I am thinking any real criminal would run away. Not these guys. I didn't hear anything, but I saw the torches being turned off. So I rang again. Nothing. No noise, no shuffling. Nothing that would make one think someone was trying to escape. All I heard was her breathing. I saw a half-broken brick on top of the bed. People placed them to protect the bins from flying open when it's windy, so I pushed the brick next to my feet just in case I'd have to use it. Then suddenly I became brave. I pressed the buzzer again, but this time I yelled, "Delivery!" I heard some footsteps, so I repeated it. A husky voice from the other side of the door said, "Nope, that's the next door." My heart almost stopped. My brain began to scatter and I stammered, Sorry, sir." Then I heard the most beautiful noise in the world. Sirens. You see, I am not the greatest fan of cops, but that sound made me feel safe for the first time ever. It was like hearing Frank Ocean's Nights for the first time. That is when the fear which the criminals in my house had the courtesy of possessing became vocal. Hurrying movements and shuffling radiated from in the house. I heard a door from a distance swing open, followed by rushing footsteps, implicative of running. As the footsteps joined into the unified sound of a whole city, sirens flushed out all of the noise. I told her to remain silent and remain alert. The cops were in front of the house and I took my helmet off. The cop asked me if I was the one who called and I said yes. "Is she still in there?" "Yes." They surrounded the house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered. The cops told me to ask her to remain in the house. Another cop then radioed in, saying the back door was open and the garden window smashed. They said they were going. After searching the house, they found her underneath the bed safe. A few cops went on to search for the suspects, but because my area is full of lakes, ponds, rivers, thickets, and marshes, intertwined with residential properties, it was difficult to find them. I went back to put my bike into the garage. When I came back, she looked visibly shaken but was also happy. She thanked me and I was happy she was fine. They could not take anything as a bag and some valuables were found scattered in the garden. They probably felt the inventory was too heavy for them to make a swift escape. This whole ordeal lasted longer than the time it took me to write this, but I'm happy I finally put it on the proverbial paper. Why now? I was reminded when 2 police officers knocked on my door to inform me that the suspects had finally been caught, and they had used the footprints from my bathroom and DNA from hers to identify them. The robbers were caught in the act and charged with the 2 previous attempted break-ins, for the one at mine and hers. I guess the thieves were still laymen when they had attempted to break into my room and were easily irked, not so much the second time around. Whatever they may feel now, let's not meet a third time. When I was around 25 years old, I was working at a tiny restaurant that served desserts. It was a pretty hidden and quiet location, so I was there alone in the mornings. On one occasion, a man walked in and I recognized him from the night before. He had been there with his wife and grown children. The only other time I'd ever seen him. This time he was alone and began talking to me. Everything seemed like the typical small talk, but he kept commenting that I looked 19 and saying that he could help me. That he could get me into his job that paid $7 more than what I was making at the time. I was intrigued at first, so I asked for the name of the company, getting kind of excited, but he would just keep talking and not give it to me. He then began talking about how he has affairs and that his wife knows and is okay with it, mentioning that he had an affair with somebody once who was 19, and that now she was happily married and that to that day she thanks him for all he taught her. At this point I'm getting creeped out, but he wouldn't stop talking. This one car drove by in the solitary area, and they'd wave at him through the glass doors, and he kept telling me how he knew so many people. It all felt very shady. He wouldn't stop pestering me about this job, telling me I should apply but not giving me a name. He would tell me the overall area of where it was at, which was by the outskirts of the city, but avoid the name. Kept telling me to follow him after work so that he could come get me in. Probably hired on the spot. I told him my car was getting fixed, so my sister would be picking me up anyway, so I couldn't, but since he wouldn't take no for an answer, I eventually decided to tell him I would, just so he could leave. But as soon as I did, he changed the goal, and now he was telling me to just get into his car with him. That way they would see me arrive with him and would hire me right away. In between all of this, he randomly shows me a white paper that was supposedly his license to carry. Very random. He also gives me a name of the company. Eventually I told him I would and come back at the time I'd be off, just so that he would leave. I went to the back and looked up the name of the supposed job and there was nothing. I used Google Maps to search the area he mentioned and nope, not a factory, not anything. Once my time to leave arrived, my sister picked me up from the side of the building, and as we drove away, he had indeed came back and was parked near the location around the corner. Never saw him again. I was recently retelling this story to a friend of mine and deeply regretting not reporting this. I had an issue of dissociation due to past life experiences, and although I was 25, I was much more naive than most 25-year-olds. You never know what people are about, especially with him showing me his license to carry, and I hope that me not reporting it didn't get anyone else hurt. I work late at a lab at the University of South Florida, as I like to do my work with nobody else around. My apartment is just a short way off campus, around a 10-minute drive and a 40-minute or so walk depending on what I took. While I do live in Tampa, it's far away from the cities. No 3-story buildings in sight, a few neighborhoods, ample amounts of trees and ponds, and a stone's throw from a rather sizable state park of 240 acres, which in turn is adjacent to a substantially larger wilderness area. What that means is a lot of wildlife. I regularly see deer grazing on a golf course nearby, growing alligators, roaming the ponds and small lakes. Turtles abound, plenty of vultures, storks and smaller birds, and much more. On my nightly walks or drives, I've often heard or even seen foxes, bobcats, coyotes, and even a black bear once. So you can imagine when I found out several cats and small dogs had gone missing, I naturally thought that if a predator was responsible, it would be one of the larger coyotes or bobcats, or maybe even a bear or gator. People, especially in gated communities, leave their pets out to roam about in the day or at night. Still, that did leave the question of how a predator could or would get over several fences and gates, some of which would be quite the hassle to climb, and there was no sign of being tunneled under. Why go for a pet inside a box that would be hard to get out of when fat ducks were extremely abundant? Well, I got my answer in a way I never expected. I was driving back from the lab late around 11 p.m. when I stopped as I could see an animal on the road. The figure was very tall but also thin, so I initially thought the pale color I saw to be viewing a deer from behind. However, I soon noticed the animal was actually pale all over its main body and had extremely thin dark legs. When it raised itself up somewhat, I realized I was looking at a great white heron from behind. Great white herons are a regional color morph of great blue herons, being nearly all white in coloration, including the trademark tassels coming off the brows of the birds, save for the top jaw and feet, which are both dark blue or black. The white form usually only appears in very southern Florida, but occasionally one will show up further north. They also tend to be on the larger end of the species size. I make no jest when I note how big this avian was. Standing up straight, some of the bigger great herons can look a grown man in the eye. Behind a nearly foot-long crazy-shaped beak, the heron was throwing its head up and down and was clearly doing something, but I couldn't be sure of what. It was standing in the road about 20 yards ahead of my car, and only reacted when I got closer. It swung its head around, and I'll never forget the sight right as I stopped 10 yards away. The heron was standing still, unflinching, as its eyes brightly reflected in the headlights. The white feathers across the chest and part of the wing were stained a tarry red from coagulating blood, as it had half of a cat hanging out of its mouth. Herons can gulp down surprisingly large prey, such as big fish, muskrats, bullfrogs, and even young alligators. But it's one thing to see them swallow a wild creature whole and still, frame or in pixels on a video. It's a whole different ordeal to see one doing it in the flesh after killing its very prey by impaling it on the beak. When I compared their beak earlier, I meant it. They can impale that thing through the armored scales of garfish. herons have been known to kill eagles by ramming their beaks through the latter's chest. This poor cat never stood a chance. The heron didn't at all seem fazed by my arrival. Instead, it flicked the dead cat back and forth, some to position at its mouth, before tilting its head up. You know that shot from Jurassic Park with the Tyrannosaurus swallowing a goat? Same sort of visual at first, only with another disgusting detail. When the heron started swallowing, its thin neck bulged outwards to accommodate the food. It kept its eyes pointed straight at me as the big wad of slain feline slowly worked down its throat to the crop, sometimes a limb visibly impressing outwards from the stretched skin. All the while the heron let out raspy breaths, while standing tall, still spattered in gore from pecking the poor pet to death. And after it finally swallowed its prey, the heron paced closer in to the side of the road. It actually got next to the car at one point and was close enough I could confirm its height at about 5 feet or more because the top of its back was level with my side mirror. It was at that point I realized I had the windows partially rolled down and was smelling the sanguine musk of death. The damn bird was level with my window, looking right at me and leaning closer. Needless to say, that snapped me out of my stupor. I blared the horn to make it back off. On the menu or not, I didn't at all like how it was looking at me. Driving down the road and making the turn, I could still see it looking towards the car as it paced down the darkened sidewalks, like it was the most casual thing ever for a 4 to 5 foot tall predator, half covered in blood, to be there. Obviously, I was in no direct danger myself, being in the car and decidedly not on the menu, but I didn't at all like the way it looked at me. This avian predator clearly didn't at all fear people, even if it seemed conscious of cars in my presence. And given this happened at a gated community, I'd never seen any mammalian predators bigger than a possum, and I think it's fair to say I now know what was eating the pets. We can often hear nowadays that birds are living dinosaurs, but I don't think some quite register that as the featherheads they're familiar with are fat city pigeons or delicious fowl. I think seeing this would help get the message across. And at night, ever so often, I can hear the deep, throaty shrieks that species give off flying over from the forests and swamps and into the neighborhoods. Don't leave your pets out, people. I moved out of state to a very small town. On the first day of moving in, a neighbor walking his dog greets me and introduces himself to me. Gives me a quick rundown that the neighborhood is filled with tweakers and other shady types. I took that as a general warning that may be all I'll deal with. A few months later, he invited me over to his place to teach me how to do some woodwork. As we were making a shelf for my cat to sit on, he's asking me questions. To me, they were normal everyday questions, but looking back, I realized how he was trying to get information out of me. Why did you move out here from out of state? Who lives with you, or do you have any other family members in the state or area? Once we were done, we went to install the shelf and he met my mom, who stays with me. He talks to her for a bit, then we leave to walk back to his place. He starts telling me that he can see our yard from his place and notices that I barely go outside with my dogs. Told me not to worry that if someone breaks into our place, he can see them and shoot them from his room. That's what I'm thinking. How is that possible because you live over half a block away? Before I can question him, he asks me if I want to see more of the town. I'm like, yeah, let's go. He walks to his car and pulls something out from the middle compartment, and then tells me to go in his pickup truck. So I do, while he's filling the gas tank up with gasoline. Once he's done, he walks to the driver's side, opens the door and drops a holster between us. He tells me not to worry about it as I look, trying to see if it was a gun or not. As we're driving, I realize he hasn't said a word for about 5 minutes, and this guy loves to hear his own voice. Another thing I noticed is that we're on a dirt road and haven't seen a single house, trailer, or vehicle for a while. I guess I gave off some nervous vibes because he suddenly goes, "So yeah, you know where you're going out here. If you don't, you get lost. And it's best to have a pickup or ATV to drive out here." After about another 10 minutes of silent driving, we get to a little creek. Luckily, there was another truck there. All he says is, "Oh, look at that, someone else is here with us." And he grabs the holster and gets out. We see a lady with a big dog playing in the water. She turns to us and she sees him walking closer to her. She gestures to his holster and he tells her not to worry, that it's for the snakes. She lifts her shirt above her waist to show her gun and she tells him she's not worried one bit. They talk for a few minutes and she tells him that her husband is home waiting for her to make dinner and she's just out letting the dog have some playtime. The neighbor changes his tone and posture from confident to defensive now. She called her dog and they went back to their truck. He's watching her and she hasn't started her truck yet. Few minutes pass and he tells me, "I guess it's time we go too." When we get to his truck, she drives off. On the drive back, I start to get uneasy and creeped out. Why would he drive me all the way out there and just leave? Why tell me not to worry about the holstered gun, but tell the lady what it's for? I finally get out of my head and just break the silence and give him my life story as to why I moved. Finally, he responds that he can relate to my story and gives me the rundown of how the town is and what it's about, and that some people are more racist than others and I should watch my back for that. Once we get back to his place, I tell him I have stuff to take care of at home and get the heck out of there. I said to myself, if I'm ever going to hang out with him again, it won't be alone. This happened a few years ago. I was going through a difficult time, so I was looking for a new place to live without big commitments until I figured life out. I met this guy through a Craigslist posting. He said he had an apartment and was looking for a roommate. I got his name and number, called him, set up a meeting at a public place for a meet and greet. Everything was seemingly fine and he agreed to show me the place. He seemed super nice and helpful. He was easy to get along with, was neat and low maintenance. It didn't bother me that he was a guy. We agreed on no drugs, no parties, and no craziness terms. We agreed on monthly payments and I moved in a few weeks later. So it was after 2 weeks. One day he comes in early from work and has this very upset voice and claims that we need to talk. He says that I've been acting inappropriately by having my boyfriend stop by on occasion, not even to stay or spend the night or anything like that, to see me for like 10 minutes every now and then. I began questioning him and he just said that he made him feel uncomfortable because everyone at the apartment complex thought I was his romantic partner. I was so furious and couldn't believe this. It then escalated to a point that he said the entire time he had known me, which is for like 2 weeks of very minimal interaction, plus the fact that I work night shifts, so he was by himself most of the time when he was home. He was convinced that, "I believe you are possessed. I can see it in your eyes." I knew at this point that shit had totally hit the fan and that I needed to get as far away from this weirdo as I could. He acted all calm, saying that I could take my time looking for a new place and that our arrangement would not work. So I told my boyfriend what happened, found an apartment I could move into, and had planned to do it the very next day. I told the insane roommate. The next day my moving out comes, and I walk into the apartment to get my stuff. There is this wooden cross above my room's door frame with Jesus on it, which was pretty offensive to me since I am a Christian and this lunatic had decided that I'm possessed. I walk into my room and there are these creepy candles all lit. I packed up all my belongings and left. He sent a message to me later with, of course, something that had to do with God and how he was hoping I would face my sins in darkness. I blocked this creep's number after that. I do trust people a lot less and would never have a roommate now. And this was the very first time ever in my life that I had one. Yeah, for 2 weeks. So I live in a compound, and we have a gym in the community. I used to go at 2 a.m. 6 times a week. One day this guy walks in and starts working out, and at the end of my session, he says if I needed any gym advice, I should ask him. What was weird is he's really skinny, while you can tell I've been gymming for a really long time. I didn't really think much of it until a few days later. He appeared again at the same time. For a whole year, I've never seen him come at this time. And he started talking to me during my workout, and we exchanged Instagram accounts. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he recently moved into this compound and wants to meet people. Same day he messaged me saying, "I see some good chest progress," to which I replied, "Thank you, I appreciate it," and also didn't think much of it. For the next 3 weeks, he would try to initiate outings and gymming together, which I wasn't interested in, so I avoided him and changed my gym time because I changed my sleep schedule. Coincidental. So once I went to the gym at 9 p.m., he was already there, and I was kind of forced to have a conversation with him afterwards for like 10 minutes, and he said, "Let's go for coffee," which I declined, saying my friends are waiting for me online, and I could see a disappointed look on his face. A few days later, he was driving into the compound and saw me walking back home, so he honks the car and initiates another conversation right outside my house. He talked about his uni work and how busy he is as I cut the conversation, saying it was too humid, so I'm going inside. The next day, he walked into the gym a few seconds after I did, and we were chatting about random stuff. One of them being how I was buying these LED lights on Amazon, and slowly he started talking about praying and religion and what I think about it and whether I pray or not. I said I do have a relationship with God and I pray in my own way, and he kept repeating some of my sentences. sighing right after. It was very weird, so I put my earphones on and said I'll listen to music, and I could tell he was doing random workouts as if to wait for me to be done. He catches up to me as I'm leaving and starts talking about the car parked outside my house and how I should see his car one day, which I agreed to. Literally right the next day, he called me 3 times, which I didn't pick up until the next day, when he called me and I picked up in case I saw him in the gym. I was preparing to go. I told him I was busy the day before and he said it's okay. I just wanted to tell you I left you some LED lights on your car. I couldn't relax until I made sure I gave them to you, to which I replied, "You don't have to, I don't want them," as he kept insisting and saying it was nothing. Everything that has happened before this moment seemed weird but not creepy. During the phone call, I felt so uneasy that I almost just hung up and blocked his phone number, as he was becoming really obsessive. He said, "What are you up to?" To which I replied, "Not much, might go to the gym later, but I was planning to go now. I just didn't want him to follow." And he replied, "Oh cool, I'm doing some studying and researching some stuff." So I said, "Alright man, enjoy," and hung up. I went around my whole house making sure all the doors and windows were completely shut and locked and headed to the gym, and bam, he was there. We said hi to each other and I put my earphones on and completely avoided him until I finished. He followed and said, "Hey, you want to see my car now?" Which I said sure. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. The whole building is covered with 24/7 surveillance, so I went and saw his car on the basement floor. And as we got to it, he looked back at a guy that had just arrived there with his bothered look. So he looked back at me and said, "Well, this is my car." I said, "Oh, cool." As I started stepping away, he started talking about his bike and how he wrecked it. It was next to the car, as if to get me back closer to the car. So I said, "Alright, well, I'll see you." Just as he said, "Wait, let me walk you home," which I refused as he gave me another weird look. I forgot to mention that this guy's presence on Instagram is super weird. He just posts about cars and selfies from up to 1 year ago. Nothing about him before then, no name, no age. He told me he's 18. I'm 22. I have no idea how to act. Do I block this person and tell him I don't want to communicate with him? Do I stay in contact with him to make sure they don't pull some weird stuff since they know where I live? Do I call the authorities? I'm sitting at home feeling like I'm being watched. Any advice? I, 29 female, had a very strange encounter with an older man back in college. Like many college students, I was struggling for money. I lived in an area most would consider wealthy. It was a very popular tourist destination for rich families. As a result of that, I decided that it would be a good idea to go on a sugar baby website to try and earn a passive income. I'd heard horror stories from prior sugar babies and would get cold feet when talking about meeting up with men online. At one point, I decided to suck it up as I needed money to pay rent and made plans to meet up with one of them. It was nothing extravagant, just a trip a few hours out of town to a popular hot spring. I was still nervous and extremely cautious as the trip approached and made sure all my friends had my location and all the information about this man in case something were to happen. The night before the trip, he had reached out to confirm the plan and wanted to make sure I felt as comfortable as possible. He asked if I needed him to pick me up and if I wanted my own room at the hotel, just in case I wasn't wanting to stay in a room with him. I told him I would drive myself, so I'd be able to leave freely at any time, and said I'd like my own room. Arriving to meet him, the nerves kept growing. I should have listened to my gut. When I arrived at the hotel, it wasn't anything but what I had expected. It was a tiny, dingy motel with about 10 rooms and looked almost abandoned. I saw the man standing outside talking to who I assumed was a worker. They seemed friendly, like old pals. I got out of my car and went to meet the man face to face for the first time. He was nothing like I had expected. He looked very dirty and tired. He asked if I wanted to take my things to the room, and as he opened the door, I saw 2 beds, one of which already had his belongings scattered about. I asked about the separate room, to which he informed me the motel was sold out for the night, so we would have to share. I should have gotten in my car and left, but I was tired after the long drive and it was getting dark. Sharing a room with a stranger seemed more logical than driving hours home on roads I wasn't familiar with for miles and miles without cell service in the dark. After I put my belongings in the room, the man suggested we go to dinner. He said it was just down the road and he would drive. I agreed and got into his truck. I immediately noticed how disgusting it was. There was mud everywhere, and all the plastic was caked with a thick layer of what I assume was dog slobber and hair. He got on the main road for the town and drove towards the restaurant. My understanding was that it was just down the road. I was incorrect. We drove for about 30 minutes before arriving in the next town over, where the restaurant was actually located. Sitting down to eat, I was filled with dread. I didn't want to be there any longer, but it would definitely be too late to drive home once I got back to my car. I ate pretty quickly and tried to keep the conversation polite and friendly, as this man seemed to be somebody I wouldn't want to anger. When we got back to the motel, I was searching for anywhere else to stay in the area, but everything was something I couldn't afford. He then offered to take me to the hot springs, and I agreed again, as being in a public area felt the safest. After arriving at the hot spring, he enlightened me to why he picked that specific location. A girl he used to see worked there, and he wanted to make her jealous. After a little while, it seemed like he realized she no longer worked there and wanted to go back to the motel. Back in the room, he began talking about his life, and I started to think that maybe he wasn't as creepy as I had thought. Maybe he's just a lonely old man who wanted some company. I became more relaxed as the conversations went on, until he started talking about his ex-wives. I'm a little fuzzy on the exact details of the conversation, as it became tense and panicked with every sentence he added. What I do remember is that his first wife was murdered, and he came home to find her body, and the second one had gone missing, and the police believe she was killed and hidden somewhere. I calmly excused myself to the bathroom and started texting my male friend I had, asking them to come to me. It was almost 2 a.m. at this point, and nobody was willing to make the drive. I did have one friend who called me and told me to leave the call running as long as I needed until I could leave. I came out of the bathroom and let the man know that I was going to sleep. He said it was a good idea since it was so late and headed into the bathroom. He came out after just a few seconds holding an old straight razor. He asked if I would be willing to help him shave his face before bed and made a comment about how nice the razor feels on his neck. I declined and told him I was really tired and would be going to bed. I put my phone on the charger with the call still running, set my alarm for sunrise, and tried my best to pretend to be asleep. For the next few hours, I could hear him walking around the room and rummaging through his belongings. I am certain at one point he was standing at the foot of my bed watching me sleep. As soon as my alarm went off, I got up, ran to the bathroom, and changed. When I came out of the bathroom, he was fully dressed and the front door was wide open. His whole demeanor had changed from the night before. He was angry. I grabbed all of my items and headed towards the door. As I was leaving, he threw some money at me and yelled that I need to get all of my stuff out of the fridge, which was just a half-empty bottle of Gatorade. As I was pulling out of the parking lot, I noticed the surprising lack of vehicles for a place that was supposed to be sold out. When I got home, I went to delete my profile off the site and saw I had a message from the man. He said he wanted to let me know how nice it was to spend time with me and wanted to come visit me in the near future. So, I live in a county that was pretty rural until the last 10 or 15 years. The biggest town in our county is pretty crowded now. Overcrowded, and I hate it. I moved from there to the countryside. I like where I live, except it can be really creepy at night because for miles and miles, it's dark and has no streetlights. One thing about this county is that the main roads always get backed up real quick if there's an accident or whatever, so it pays to go to the back roads. The back roads, like any other rural place, are less populated, dark, and have lots of trees. And no sidewalks, of course. Anyways, a few years ago, something happened that almost made me stop using them. I was driving home kind of late one night. I decided to take one particular back road that shaved off 10 minutes from my commute home. I was tired and had to get up early, so I was going fast trying to get home. This road is a little bit more populated than some, but it is super spooky in some stretches because huge trees are alongside the road and their branches and leaves make a tunnel of sorts. So I'm zipping through and around a curve. Up ahead, I see what I thought was a giant garden flag. You know the flags that people put up in spring in their yards? Well, I thought it was a weird flag because it seemed like it was fairly tall and large, and it was in the middle of the road. As I get closer, my headlights hit it, and it's not a flag. It is a person. A lady. She was wearing a red fez. I live in rural Maryland, and you don't just see a fez every day. A long flowy white dress and an orange reflective sash across her chest. A little strange because she's in the middle of the street. As I drove past her, it got weirder. As dark as it was, as I drove by, I could see that she was about 60. She had glasses and I could see her bright blue eyes. She looked in my passenger window and she started doing this weird bounce thing. I thought she was going to try and get into my car. Mind you, I'm going pretty fast. I don't know what it was about her, but she freaked me the heck out. I didn't think she would try to rob me or anything. I really thought she was a soul snatcher or a skinwalker, to be honest. I honestly don't think she was human. I can't adequately describe how creepy she was. I sped past her as fast as I could. I kept glancing in my back seat to make sure she had not materialized in my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept watching my rearview mirror. It was spring, so a little bit warm, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. I could finally make it home, and I run in to tell my mom the story. I got in just as my brother was telling my mom about this weird lady he saw as he was driving. It was the same lady, but he saw her at the intersection from the highway and the back road, whereas I saw her further down the road. We both had the same reaction. She also tried looking in his car. She also was bouncing around when he saw her. He said there was a car in front of him that sped off so fast when they drove past the lady. My brother was so freaked out that he won't travel that road anymore, even during the day. Eventually, I found out that the lady lives in the woods. Apparently at one time her family lived on that road. Her father was ill and she tried to take him to the hospital. He died on the way there and she drove around with his body in her car for hours. I guess she has mental health issues and I think she lost the house or got kicked out. I have friends that live off that street, so when I was talking about it, they knew exactly who it was. I still go on that road, but I haven't seen her since. I do hope she's okay, of course, but I really do not want to run into her again. To preface this and give some context, I am a 21-year-old male who makes a habit of taking road trips across the US and am not one who is inexperienced when it comes to hiking or dangerous situations. I've had people stalk my camp in Kansas and stare over my fire in Utah with a shotgun. Point being, I've had weird experiences, but none that have ever chilled me like this. This just happened earlier today, and I want to get it out while the image is still sharp in my mind. I was out hiking in a trail in southern Indiana with a female friend of mine. It was around 90 degrees and muggy as all get out. The trail is the Three Lakes Trail, and it is a little over 10 miles long and is circular, so nearly impossible to get lost. We had arrived early in the morning, and so there was almost nobody in the park at all, save for a few parked vehicles. We had been hiking the trail for about 3 hours and not seen a soul. Usually, I pay attention to my surroundings a bit more and am cautious of people just because of life experiences and the subreddit even, but with good conversation and laughs, I was distracted. My friends and I are walking downhill towards a sharp left turn when out of seemingly nowhere, a woman steps around the bend and starts hiking up the hill towards us with her head down. She was average height, but much more muscular than a typical woman. She is wearing a sports bra, short shorts, and a backpack, which left most of her body exposed. Her tattoos are what first caught my eye. All across her body are those weird shapes and symbols that didn't make much sense. I didn't see anything that resembled a picture or English words. As she came within about 10 feet of us, she looked up and we made eye contact. That is when everything in me just froze up. Her face had similar symbols tattooed all over and in strings all over her face. Her eyes, though, are what I'll remember for a long time. They were just black sockets, and in the shade of the dense canopy, I couldn't make out that much about what it actually was. With how humid it was that day, I don't believe that the dark sockets were makeup, and so I assumed that all around her eyes were tattooed solid black. On top of this, she must have had colored contacts in her eyes, as there was no white at all. With every horror and cult scenario I've ever heard running through my mind, and her face chilling me to the soul, I blurred out, "Good day for a hike." She just looks at me with this empty stare, holds eye contact, and walks by us. I have never been so shaken up from running into someone out on a trail before, and hope to never see something like that again. In high school, I was a band nerd. During the time of this story, I was a sophomore, 15 female, and was in my second year as a majorette. I had previously played an instrument but found my way to a baton at some point. Because the band was pretty well respected, we often had music majors from the local college interning with our band director. This year we had 3. A 20-something woman working with the flag line, a 24-year-old man working with the drum line, and a 25-year-old man working as an assistant band director or intern. They started working with our groups at the end of the summer during band camp, so we became somewhat familiar with them fairly early into the year. That is how the whole band knew that the flag intern and the band director intern were actually engaged to be married. As teens do, we thought it was super romantic. Not long after the start of the school year, the band director intern was already trying to be cool with all the teens, joking around and being relatable. I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Brian. Red flag number 1, probably. Overall, he seemed charming and safe in a very stereotypical nerd kind of way. Plus, his fiancée was always nearby. I started to feel a mixture of special and uncomfortable when Brian began focusing a little bit more attention on me specifically. At first, I wrote it off as him choosing to speak to me as the majorette captain. A bit of a near peer authority position. My 15-year-old brain reasoned. The discomfort started to become squirmy when he offered me his phone number if I needed anything ever. I knew for certain that he hadn't offered this to other section leads, so this was a choice that singled me out. After that point, things rapidly moved into a place that made me feel less special and more targeted. It is hard to remember a lot of the specifics. I have vague memories of avoiding him on away game bus rides and asking why Tanya, the fiancée, wasn't riding on the same bus. More vagueness around avoiding him during and after practices, feeling a little bit more concerned at times, and eventually outright declining some kinds of romantic invitations. I can't remember when he started mentioning how pretty I was or how I needed to be careful wearing such short practice shorts. I do remember dreading the first time I had to wear our skimpy majorette uniform with him around. Previous experience, aforementioned sad stories, had taught me not to be quiet about this. I started by jokingly alerting friends about the escalating focused attention, then by telling my then senior class sister that he was saying increasingly creepy and inappropriate things. It was only a few days after I told my sister that the last incident with Brian occurred. A few times during the weeks of band camp, he had offered to give me a ride home. I always declined. It was unnecessary but also previous experience, so I knew I had never given him an address or directions to my very rural house, which is why it was the height of scary and creepy. When his car pulled up beside me one Saturday as I was walking down the road in front of my house, we would often walk down our wooded country road, when the weather was nice. Alarm bells clanging, I curtly asked him what he was doing there. He calmly said he was just in the area. Highly unlikely, given it was a residential-only, very rural, hard-to-find area. I asked if he knew this was where I lived, and he surprisingly admitted he did. Backing away from the road into the grassy tree-lined ditch, I remember consciously not smiling. I flatly responded, "No, please go." He said when he would offer me a ride. Not wanting to give any indication of where my house was, I moved further into the tree cover and began walking away. Thankfully, my grandfather was an old-school tech head, so I had a bulky cell phone in my pocket. I immediately dialed my sister's cell and filled her in. Thankful for her. She was revving the 1982 engine of her 280Z hatchback for all of its worth when she pulled up. Creepy Brian had been slowly cruising back and forth along the strip of country road where I had camouflaged myself in the trees. As soon as I heard my sister's engine, I headed back towards the road, where I found her stopped in the oncoming traffic lane, shouting through her lowered passenger window at this grown man. Her face in that moment is etched into my memory. I immediately felt safer. Remembering that look still makes me feel warm and secure. I gave his car a wide berth as my sister moved forward to give me access to the passenger door. Pulling a three-pointer, she again stopped by his car and let him know she would call the school, the police, the university, and my grandpa if he didn't turn his happy ass right around and get the heck off our road. We followed his car back to the highway and watched him drive far enough to be comfortable before we went back home. She and I both reported all of the creepy, questionable behavior to the band director and school officials. She had connections in the music department of the university. Musical prodigy, long story, and reported him there also. He did not return to my high school and, as far as I am aware, did not graduate from our local college. It later turned out that the fiancé, who continued to appear at games and practices with flag twirlers, had heard something about his targeting me from those girls. I hadn't known how obvious his attention was, but rumors had been flying. So much so that barely anybody questioned the reason for his sudden absence. From what I understand, she initially stayed with him, but the engagement was eventually broken, and she really never looked me directly in the eye after that day. All that to say this, it frightens me to remember how casually other teenage girls responded to their witnessing his behavior towards me. Some girls even showed hints of envy or jealousy, which makes me sad to remember. Some teenage girls can become so desensitized to the inappropriate attentions and advances of boys and men. They giggle and joke and relate to the creeped out feelings, sometimes missing the subtle red flags that indicate a situation is becoming actually dangerous. If my sister had not given me a safe place to say how he really made me feel, who knows how much further that situation could have escalated. I hope you all really talk to the teenage girls in your life. Be their safe person with no judgment if you can. If you made it this far, thank you for reading or listening. This felt like a cleansing purge. I used to be naively helpful to all sorts of strangers and often picked up hitchhikers solo and in groups, and got them where they needed to go. When I was 19, I had moved to Huntington, a college town in West Virginia, and I worked at a popular bar. My shifts would start at around 9 p.m. and end at about 2 a.m. I didn't know anybody in this town or state even, and I had been there on my own for only a month or so. On one of these nights, one of the customers had taken an interest in conversing with me while I was working my shift. I, being a good employee, conversed pleasantly back. He was in his 30s or 40s, buzzed white hair, with a group of other guys, all of them tattooed and with leather jackets. Nothing against leather or tattoos. I have and wear both. Just giving visual details. He had been there going back and forth between them at their table and me at the bar, pretty much talking to me nonstop for a good couple of hours. At around 1:30 a.m., he mentions he doesn't know where his friends went. I look up oblivious and see the whole bar had virtually cleared out. He was right. Not one of his buddies was in sight. He says they must have all gotten drunk and forgot about him, leaving him there. The man is clearly bummed and concerned because, as he tells me, he lives almost an hour away from here and has no way of getting home now. And it's the middle of winter, so it's snowing pretty hard. He spends the next few minutes on the phone calling the different friends that were at the bar with him, but nobody is answering. He is clearly screwed. I can't leave him in the bar, and I can't in good conscience leave the man out in the snow. So dang, now I've got to drive this stranger home in a place I'm unfamiliar with in conditions I've never really driven in before. No snow in my home state. I tell him, don't worry, when I finish cleaning the bar and closing up, I'll take him home. And I do. We get in the car and he gives me directions as we go. We are talking casually like we had been, just superficial conversation, nothing even hinting at sexual or flirty. I'm not a flirty person, so I'm positive there was no misunderstanding here. Keep in mind it's like 2 in the morning. No one knows where I am or that I'm with this rando, and it's snowing heavily. As we are chatting, suddenly I feel his hand on the back of my neck. It was such an unpleasant feeling. I remember his fingers swirling in the little hairs at the bottom of my hairline, which were too short to make it into the ponytail. I scrunched my neck and just calmly said, I have a knife, as I kept looking forward while driving. The swirling ceased, but the hand lingered on my skin. Again calmly but more firmly, I said, I have a knife. He removed his hand and we kept driving. I figure whatever that was is handled, and we get back to our conversation. Minutes later, I feel his hand fully against the back of my neck, his fingers wrapped gently around its curve. I scrunched my neck again and said seriously, I have a knife. I have a knife. He removed his hand once more, and then in a very hurt tone he said, Are you really scared of me? After that, he kept his hands to himself. It was a long 1-hour drive, but I got him home and I took off. I'm 29 now, and it wasn't until many years later that it occurred to me that the whole thing was probably a setup he and his friends planned. They probably left him stranded so that the chick he'd been talking to all night will have to take him home, opening the door for sex, consensual or maybe even not. Moral of the story, don't let people you don't know in your car, and also carry a knife.